What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto x Alya? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. Naruto Uzumaki's gaze was unflinching as he watched his opponent, augmented eyes seeing every twitch of his muscles and every movement of his chakra. His opponent was one of the last two living members of Akatsuki, the organization of S-class criminals which turned his life upside down and tore everything he ever loved from him. 5 years, 5 long years of struggle and fighting, of loss and grief, of anger and hatred. Naruto had thought that it was over when he defeated the first generation, but Madara Uchiha was a truly twisted and conniving individual, and he had rebuilt the organization in the shadows after his supposed defeat, making his presence known when Naruto turned 18. The entire Hidden Leaf village had been completely unprepared when the Akatsuki attacked them directly. When they resurfaced, he had been elevated to the rank of Jonin, High Ninja. He was the next candidate to become Hokage, selected by the Sannin herself. Even he didn't see this coming, and the worst thing was that he should have. He had eventually inherited Jiraiya's vast spy networks, and had become a master of the art to the point where Tsunade said the old pervert would be smiling down at him, wherever he was. He should have seen this coming, but Akatsuki had completely avoided his network. Any of his spies who found even the slightest of information probably died before they could relay it. 10 S-class shinobi infiltrated Konohagakure no Sato that day and caused such havoc, took so many lives just to get what he possessed. There was a reason why they were all considered S-class, S for suicidal. Unless you were considered an S-class shinobi, it was suicidal to face one, let alone 10. He could still see the partially collapsed Hokage monument, the burning corpses of the buildings. The faces, by the gods he could still see the faces. Faces of friends, who had once been laughing, smiling, were ashen and lifeless, blood spattered over their final expressions before death. Naruto had made it his mission to hunt every last member of Akatsuki down and purge them from the earth. And he had done it. For 5 long years he had hunted, fought and killed every member of that thrice-damned organization. He had found and destroyed the Gedo Mezu, nullifying Madara's dreaded Moon Eye plan and scattering the entrapped 8 Biju to the 4 winds. Every single one had succumbed to the last host's merciless hunt. Now all that remained standing between him and the architect was this man, one single man, a man who Naruto had once considered a brother, but now looking back he scoffed at the notion. His brother had died at the Valley of the End all those years ago. All that remained was a shell whose only craving was that of vengeance on the world. He had finally caught up to the 2 Uchiha. It would all end here, deep within the deserts of the Land of Wind, the great ruins of an ancient town surrounding them. A relic from a time after the sage separated and dispersed the Biju, when the Ichibi no Shukaku freely roamed the deserts, leaving trails of devastation once every century. This town was one of the relics of that time, and even after the great beast had been sealed it had never been repopulated. It stood there, a reminder of a darker age. Sasuke Uchiha showed no emotion as he returned Naruto's glare. Once Sasuke was defeated he would face down Madara, and finish this feud once and for all. "You're the last one," so it would seem. There were no words spoken between them, instead they both blurred through a set of hand seals, finishing at exactly the same time. Both shinobi were considered the best in the world, considered in the same league as the likes of Hanzo the Salamander and the legendary Sannin. They had even been likened to Madara Uchiha and the Shodai Hokage Hashirama Senju. Kaden. Karyu Enden. Sasuke took a deep breath and exhaled a stream of liquid fire towards his opponent, the flames so strong that they combusted the grass between them. Naruto didn't even flinch, opening his seal to call upon the Kyuubi's chakra and use one of his own original jutsu. Ninpo. Ichibi. His chakra became visible, encompassing him like a mystical blue fire. His living energy twisted and morphed behind him, extending from his body in time to form a single tail of pure chakra. It writhed for a split second, before circling around him in time to block the streams of flame. His tail shrugged the attack off, before streaking forward at his command, embedding itself in the earth where the Uchiha once stood as Sasuke took to the skies in a chakra-propelled leap. Naruto rushed through the dying flames of Sasuke's fire technique, making the hand seal of the dog as he took a deep breath. Futon. Shinkagyoku. He released the air from his lungs, infusing them with his chakra to create several compact bullets of wind. Sasuke saw them coming with the unnatural clarity of his activated Sharingan, and twisted his body in a corkscrew, missing the strikes by mere millimeters. He landed in a crouch, skidding slightly across the dirt as he struggled to remain standing. Naruto was already rushing towards him, already going through the subtle changes of activating his Sennin Modo, his Sage Mode, eyelids changing color to a pinkish orange, eyes changing from azure to a noble golden yellow, and the pupils reforming into bars. Naruto cocked his right fist back, gathering chakra into his palm, and lashed out at Sasuke. The Uchiha was able to jump away, but watched in horror as the ground quaked and cracked when Naruto struck the earth. Sage Mode allowed the user to access the natural energy of the world, known commonly as senjutsu, and dramatically increased their fighting ability. If that punch had connected, the Uchiha would have been reduced to a crimson smear on the ground. Fighting Naruto in taijutsu was hard enough without adding senjutsu and the frog kata that came with it into the mix. In Sage Mode, going against Naruto in taijutsu was akin to suicide, so instead Sasuke kept his distance, firing off several fire-based jutsu to keep the blonde off balance as he retreated. Before them was the ancient town hall, roof and walls half collapsed. The Uchiha ascended the stone steps, unleashing a hail of fireballs to keep Naruto out of taijutsu range. The blonde retaliated, firing off a swath of wind bullets at his opponent in a vain attempt to hit him. Naruto frowned as he cartwheeled and corkscrewed, dodging various low-level fire techniques before retaliating accordingly. Sasuke wasn't fighting at all like he expected. He wasn't using his Mangekyo Sharingan, and he wasn't trying to get close enough to use his lightning-based arsenal or genjutsu abilities. Then what the hell was he doing? Leading him into a trap? It was possible. He knew Madara was around here somewhere. He could sense the immortal bastard's chakra signature, though he was doing an almost perfect job of hiding it. Nothing could properly hide when Naruto was drawing on the Kyuubi to augment his senses. Sasuke skidded to a halt, unleashing one last massive fireball, and disappeared through the half-destroyed double doors. Naruto frowned as he sidestepped the flames, stalking up the stone steps towards the entrance. He brought his hands together in a familiar seal, calling out the name of the first high-level jutsu he ever learned, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. He created 10 clones, and sent them into the town hall. 5 in through the main entrance, another 5 encircled the structure searching for others' exits. With ease the blonde jumped in a chakra-propelled leap, landing silently on the flat roof of the desert dwelling and entering the building through a shattered window on the second floor. The only light came from the outside. It was obvious any artificial light would have burned out years ago, and with the time of day the shadows made it hard for any regular human to see. Lucky enough he was not regular. In Sage Mode his senses were sharpened to near inhuman levels. In Sage Mode he could see in the dark as well as he could see in the day. He stood on a balcony, overlooking the expansive open space which was probably once the reception. His 5 clones had cautiously crept through the reception, only to be ambushed by the Uchiha from the shadows. Naruto guessed by his influx of memories that Sasuke had taken out 2 of his vanguard before they knew what hit them, and was in the middle of fighting off the other 3 with Kusanagi. It wasn't long until the Uchiha whittled down the remaining 3 to 2, then 1, and it was obvious that the Uchiha thought the last one was the real one. Sasuke still underestimated him, even now. Sometimes Naruto wondered if his once friend now bitter enemy even heard that he had spent the last 5 years hunting down the S-rank shinobi of Akatsuki, and that he had taken them down. Oh sure, sometimes he had help in the form of Oinen and Anbu from Kiri, Suna or Aim, but most of the battles ended in a one-on-one duel to the death. Though he couldn't take all the credit for killing Kisame, the Scourge of the Hidden Mist was a powerful opponent, and it took the combined effort of him and Konan to bring the big man down. He had even given the Sharkmon's sword, Samahata, to her as thanks. Come to think of it, he hadn't seen his fellow apprentice in a while. He needed to make a mental note to visit Aim. He pushed the thoughts down, seeing Sasuke run his blade through his last remaining clone, which exploded into smoke. Naruto took the opportunity, forming a Rasengan in each hand as he stepped off the railing and fell towards his wayward teammate. Senjutsu. Rasengan. Sage Art. Rasengan. Naruto slammed the 2 fully formed Rasengan into Sasuke's abdomen, watching as the Uchiha's face contorted in pain before the backlash sent him flying back, slamming against a pair of double doors made of oak, and breaking through the strong wood, shattering the doors. Naruto sighed, deactivating his sage form to conserve chakra as he began walking. Sasuke wouldn't be beaten so easily, not in a million years. He honestly expecting one of the Mangekyo techniques, like Amaterasu or even Izanagi, but found to his surprise none came as he stepped through the remains of the oak doors. Within was a large chamber. The roof was half caved in, filling the room with rubble and debris. He saw the destroyed forms of tables and chairs. In fact, he put Sasuke through one of the last usable tables. He stopped in the center of the chamber, eyeing his opponent as he shakily got to his feet. "Come on, Sasuke. You can't beat me fighting like this." Sasuke spat out a gob of blood before he smirked, "Even after all these years you're still a gullible dope." Naruto arched an eyebrow, "Come again?" Sasuke's smirk held before he blurred through a mass of hand seals and kneeled, slamming his hands onto the ground. "You truly are hopeless, Naruto. I led you here on purpose." Glyphs and runes began to appear on the floor, snaking across the broken stone tiles to form a circular iron-clad trap seal which stretched from one side of the still usable portion of the chamber to the other. Naruto smirked as the seal work, obviously the work of a master, which immediately excluded Sasuke. This was mainly because the young Uchiha was standing within the outer layer of seals, and was trapped by the outer barrier. "Unless you started researching Fuinjutsu, I'd say this isn't your handiwork." The Uchiha scowled at him, but Naruto continued, kneeling to the ground to run a hand along the central seal, a circle covered with elemental seals which surrounded him. This is the work of a true seal master. I'd say about Jiraiya's or my level. I suppose that means it wasn't your handiwork, Hateme?" This time the Uchiha openly snarled at him, which made Naruto chuckle. How he loved to rile the traitor up. It was one of his favorite pastimes these days. "You'd be correct, Naruto." The blonde looked up at the owner of the voice, perfectly balanced on the remains of an old stone beam. Madara Uchiha hadn't changed his attire much over the years. He still wore that swirling orange mask over his face, his black hair was still short and messy, and his form was still completely hidden by that Akatsuki cloak. "Is this your handiwork, old man?" Madara chuckled lightly as he stepped off the beam, landing on the cracked floor as if he hadn't missed a beat. Yes, it was. One of the strongest trap seals. Even a Jinchuriki of your power will be unable to break free from it. Naruto shrugged. "Also means you won't be able to come to me." The iron-clad trap seal is an S-rank technique in that while it imprisons the target it also erects a barrier stopping anyone from entering. He looked at the two circles, each one the foundations of a barrier of invisible energy. He sighed in annoyance. This is going to take a while to release. The young toad sage made to reach for the massive storage scroll tied to his lower back, only to stop mid-reach when Madara chuckled. "There's no need for that. I'll be finished long before you nullify the seal." Oh, Naruto was interested. What was the crazy old fool planning? "So what are you planning?" "Why, Naruto," Madara chided mildly, "I thought you would have noticed by now. Take a closer look at the seal." Naruto frowned at the immortal, but shrugged and did as asked. He looked around him, his eyes examining every nook and cranny of the seal within seconds. A slight widening of his eyes was the only sign that he had noticed. There were extra runes and lines running throughout the seal, glyphs which he knew shouldn't be there. They served no purpose for the seal. Then he took a closer look, and cursed under his breath. There was another seal under the first, just as intricate as the last. "Look underneath the underneath." Naruto muttered his deceased sensei's words like a prayer, before turning a glare at Madara. "Are you out of your— Wait, don't answer that. You are out of your mind. Do you even know what kind of a seal this is?" He could see the mirth in the bastard's one visible eye. "Yes, it is." Naruto grit his teeth, before his eyes once again flashed across the expanse of seals he was trapped in. On their own these created a powerful entrapment seal. But the adage of these seals had never been tried before, at least not by him. The added glyphs were an over-exaggerated version of the seals used in explosive tags. This meant one thing. This was a two-way seal, one to trap him and the other to create a bomb. "What is it?" Sasuke frowned, touching the outer barrier only to be hit with an electric jolt. "It's a two-way seal." Naruto answered for the elder Uchiha. "One was a trap seal, and these extra markings are explosive runes. larger versions of the standard seals used in explosive tags. One of these would be enough to level a small house, but altogether it'll be enough to turn the entire town into one huge crater. Sasuke's eyes widened slightly, before he turned to glare at his ancestor. Is this true? I'm sorry, Sasuke. Madara answered. Without the Gedo Mezu we cannot extract the Kyuubi, and with the Biju freed there is no way we can complete the mission. The only way to survive is to remove the Kyuubi container. You mean the only way for you to survive? Sasuke spat angrily. You've been betrayed, Sasuke. Naruto chuckled sadly. Besides the situation, he was standing tall and proud, arms folded across his chest. He did not fear death. His friends, family and village were all dead. He would only be joining them. I have only two regrets. That I had to die with you and I wasn't able to take Madara with me. Sorry to disappoint you, Naruto. Madara smirked under his spiraled orange mask, before kneeling in a crouch, hands blurring through a set of hand seals. Another seal, this one an activation glyph, appeared at his feet, with a long line leading to the main seal. He finished with lightning speed and slammed his hand into the seal. The glyphs began to glow a soft blue, running along the line and encompassing the entire seal. Sasuke looked down at the glowing runes in a mix of fear and fascination. Naruto just stood still, his eyes not leaving the Uchiha elder's single Sharingan orb for a second. Death at last. Madara nodded, before his entire body began to distort and swirl, a sign that he had activated his teleportation technique, safely transporting him to a safe distance from ground zero. Slowly the glow intensified until it was blinding to even Naruto's augmented eyes. The last thing the blonde saw was an incredible bright light before he blacked out. The result was instantaneous. On a cliff ledge safely away from the town Gaara, his siblings and 3 Anbu squads watched on in horror as the ruins vanished in a huge explosion unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Before long a huge mushroom-shaped cloud of gray smoke filled the usually cloudless skyline. It would be another hour before the smoke cleared, leaving nothing more than a huge crater, full of crushed rubble and debris. It would be another 5 days of continuous searching before the search for Naruto Uzumaki's body was called off. Madara escaped the net of Anbu-Suna had put up around the ruins, and he continued to be the main target of the Oinin divisions from every village for years to come. He was eventually cornered and killed in the Land of Rice by a united force of Anbu teams from lightning, water, sand and rain. The Raikage himself was the one who ended the Uchiha, for his brother, for his adopted daughter, and for the kid who contained the Kyuubi. A monument was placed at the site of Naruto's death, naming all those who died in the world's war against Akatsuki. The names of the Jinchuriki, as well as those from every village who died, were inscribed on the 10-story tall marble memorial stones. In the center were the stone statues of the 9 Jinchuriki. Naruto's statue stood in the center, and on his plaque were messages from his surviving friends. Ayla Sakura walked out of the tent and stretched her aching muscles, failing to suppress a groan as she felt her joints pop. She had been stuck in that communications tent for the past 2 hours being debriefed by Masters Yoda and Windu. To be debriefed by the first and second Masters of the Jedi Order was an intimidating endeavor, and not something she would like to be in again anytime soon. She needed to get out of that tent, and get a breath of fresh air. Though whether the air here was fresh or not was a matter for debate. Her friend and former teacher, Quinlan Voss, had said it best. Felucia was a burning death trap. The temperature during the day was staggering at between 60 to 80 degrees, except during the night cycle or heavy storms, where it was known to fall to -10. Her choice of attire was just right for this environment. At the moment she had chosen to wear a pair of skin-tight leather pants, a cut leather vest which left her arms and stomach bare, and a pair of knee-high black boots. Even with this attire it was still hot, and she was usually covered in sweat from her exertions before the day was out. She certainly didn't envy her clone troopers, boiling away inside those armored suits. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and opened them to see the stream of activity taking place around her. The base was being taken down and packed up. Her army was on the move. Clone troopers were loading themselves inside all-terrain open transports, AT-ATs, and the 4-legged all-terrain tactical enforcers, or ATs. All in all they were on schedule, and the 327th Star Corps would be ready to advance within the hour. The 327th Star Corps was a division she had been in command of for the past year, and they had fought many battles side by side. She had come to respect the clones of the division for their battle prowess, and she knew they deeply respected her for getting them out of scrapes where they would have died in. The division's clone commander, Bly, told her as much after their first tour together. Ayla was hoping for the division to return to Coruscant after the Battle of Salukami for leave, but was denied and given a new mission. Originally the mission was to capture high-ranking separatist leader Shu Mai. But that had quickly changed just a few days after they arrived on planet. They had saved a fellow Jedi Knight, Barriss Offee, who had reported that not only had Shu Mai left the planet, but she had planned to poison Felucia's water supply. Ayla reported this to the High Council, where she was ordered to remain and stop this crisis. Reports suggested that since the Confederation leader's departure, the enemy strength on the planet was low in a few thousand battle droids and mercenaries with mid-armored support. For all intents and purposes, it seemed that the Separatists had almost abandoned this planet entirely, leaving behind an expendable token force to make it look like they tried to defend it. "Ma'am," she turned to see her friend and confidant standing to attention right behind her. Bly was her clone commander, the second in command of the 327th. He had watched her back since she was assigned as their superior, and the two had become close friends over the years they spent together. Bly was fully garbed in his field armor, the once pristine white with yellow trim now chipped and scorched from combat. "The division is ready to move out. All we are waiting for is your order." She nodded her head. "Very well, Commander. Tell the division they may advance." "Yes, General," the commander replied, before leaning in a little. "Are you all right? Old Scruffs didn't give you a hard time, did they?" She smirked at his statement. Bly had become quite protective of her over the years. Heck, half the Corps had become overprotecting of her. Anyone who even looked at her wrong would immediately feel the glares of at least 10 clones on their backs, and another 5 slowly reaching for their blasters. Ayla was used to him calling the High Masters a bunch of old scruffs, and it didn't bother her. "Nothing I couldn't take care of. They just want to know when we'll be finished mopping up. Our offer is still open," Bly whispered in an almost conspiratorial manner. Ayla laughed at that. The offer was to barge into the Jedi Temple, stun the entire High Council and hang them by their feet from the Senate entrance. Tempting, but no. The commander shrugged. "It's still open." She sighed before changing the subject. "Has Barriss moved out yet?" "About 10 minutes ago, General," Bly replied. "Don't worry, she's in good hands." "Of course she's in good hands, Gale's with her." Ayla replied with a pout, turning around to survey the thick alien jungle before her. It happened suddenly. Her mind was assaulted by a mass of memories and emotions that were not hers. So many that it was impossible to filter them out, they were completely incoherent. Hands blurred up to hold onto her forehead. She let out a gasp, and then a startled cry as the psychic backlash continued its assault. A few images became clear. An entire continent plunged into war. A woman dying on a sidewalk, shoulder-length hair of a strange pink, a hole in her chest from a powerful strike. She tried to speak, but her words were muted, lost. A young man, black hair, onyx eyes which turned crimson, was ramming a blade of blue electricity through a young woman's chest. Her long dark hair framed a pale round face, and pupil-less lavender eyes stared in shock at her killer as death took her. A city in ruins, buildings burning and streets littered with corpses. A man, hair black stretching down to the small of his back, pale white skin, purple pigment over his eyelids and eyes a sickly yellow with slit pupils. 10 figures, their faces hidden in shadows, dressed in long high-collared black cloaks, red clouds adorning them. A man, dressed in that same black cloak with red clouds. Face hidden beneath an orange mask, surface covered in a swirling pattern. The only visible portion of his face was an eye hole, a single crimson eye staring intently. A large animal, fur a blood red, 9 tails writhing and twirling around it. It seemed to look right through her, and opened its mouth to release a terrible, silent scream. A young man, human, dark blonde hair, azure eyes, tanned skin, whisker-like markings on his cheeks. He reached out to her with his right hand, mouth going through a set of silent words. "Find me." Ayla awoke with a start, feeling a set of hands grip her shoulders and shake her. Slowly she opened her eyes to be met with Bly's worried face. His mouth moved, but she could not hear the words. They sounded as if they were being spoken in slow motion, just a mass of deep sounds. But slowly her senses returned to her, and she heard his voice much more clearly. "General, damn it Ayla. Can you hear me?" "Yes," she replied, voice a croak. "Yes Bly, I can hear you. Are you all right?" the commander asked, face set in a worried frown as he helped her into a sitting position. Had she blacked out? She didn't know, but judging by her commander's reaction she must have. "I don't know," Ayla replied with a frown, right hand absently massaging her temple in a vain attempt to rid her of the lingering pain. "I think I had a vision, but it was strong, stronger than anything I've ever had before." The commander nodded. He had been around Jedi enough to know when they were having visions. Usually when this happens he wondered about their mental health, but until now this never seemed to happen to Ayla before. "Should I call a medic?" "No," Ayla replied, accepting his extended hand to help her get back to her feet. "It's nothing, I'll be fine. Find me." Her hand shot up to massage her forehead again. That voice, it was softer this time, but it was definitely the same voice she heard in her vision. She turned, ignoring Bly's worried glance to look over the alien Felucian forest. Mushroom-shaped trees reaching up to the skyline, barren landscape occasionally broken by the shoots of smaller vegetation she did not recognize. Something in those woods was calling to her. "Bly, can you take command for a moment?" she asked, knowing the answer before it left his mouth. "Of course," Bly replied in an unsure voice. "Then lead them to the rendezvous point," she ordered lightly, offering him a reassuring smile to try and negate his fears. Ayla should have known it would never work. "I don't think I should leave you alone after such a, well, I don't know what it was." She waved him off. "I'm fine now Bly, but something in this forest is calling out to me, and I don't think I'll get any rest until I find out what." Bly studied her for a moment before sighing in defeat. "The rest of them will have his balls on a hook for this. Can I at least convince you to take a squad of ARC troopers along?" She gave him a cheeky grin. "They'll only slow me down. This could be a trap you know." Her friend spoke up, unwilling to concede just yet. "A dark Jedi trying to separate you from us." Ayla closed her eyes and concentrated, allowing the force to flow through her. She sent it out in the general direction of where the psychic whiplash originated. It wasn't evil. It wasn't of the dark side. In fact it was faint, and seemed more confused and scared than dangerous. "It's not a trap, and don't even think about rolling your eyes at me Bly. This isn't a trap." "Very well, General," Bly relented, rolling his eyes anyway just to let her know his opinion. Even though he had his helmet on he could tell she knew by her half-hearted glare. "But if you're not back by the end of the day I will send an ARC squad after you." She smiled, before taking off in a force-propelled leap, shouting back, "I wouldn't expect anything less." Bly shook his head, bemused, before turning back to the column of Republic troops, a single thought leaving his mind. "Maybe she should have left me one of her lightsabers." Ayla jumped from the cliff ledge, skipped across a small series of branches, landed on the ground in a crouch and took off at a pace which would be impossible for any force-blind individual to duplicate. She rushed across the flatlands, slowing only to occasionally jump to navigate across any rocky outcrops or rolling hills. After nearly 15 minutes of running at a force-augmented pace she came to a stop, tired and panting. A Jedi Knight she may be, but such usage of the Force was a little much for her. Ayla was no Anakin Skywalker, though she wished she had his stamina and strength on occasion. After a minute of catching her breath she began to wander through the suddenly dense undergrowth at a more sedate pace. Felucia was known for its deadly wildlife, but she couldn't sense any dangerous predators in the immediate vicinity. Still she felt something powerful and foreboding. It was as if some influential creature was unleashing just a trickle of strength, keeping the other predators well out of range. Ayla didn't let this deter her though. The Force was calling to her, almost demanding that she follow this signature, so she did. Finally she pushed aside a last barrier of branches and foliage, coming to a clearing devoid of any plants or wildlife. It was just a barren spot of land, maybe 20 meters across with a single large mushroom-shaped tree in its center. She felt something about this plant. The Force itself was coalescing around it like a shining beacon. Timidly the young knight inspected the tree closer, and saw that its purplish trunk was hollowed out, a meter-long sickle-shaped slice the only way in. Curiously she peeked in, and gasped. There was someone in there. The slit was too narrow for her to squeeze through, so she reached for her hip where one of her dual lightsabers was clipped to her leather belt, and slowly drew the cylinder. She ignited the weapon, feeling the heat emanate from the azure blade before carefully cutting away at the opening. Finally it was large enough for her to squeeze, and closing down the lightsaber she began to edge through. Like many females of her race, Alya had a lithe and slender build, meaning that she could force her way through narrow spaces easier with most others. Inside the hollowed trunk the force's influence increased tenfold, and she felt slightly light-headed from the emanating power. The inside was dark, the only light creeping through the still narrow slit. Deftly Alya raised her right hand and concentrated, allowing the force to extend through her arm and create a soft white light on her fingertips. It was then that she saw what was inside the trunk. It was a human, a young man about her age, maybe a year or two younger. It was difficult to make out colors in the dark, but she could tell that his hair was light, his skin was tan and his clothes were colorful. Slowly the young Jedi knelt to inspect the man. She checked the pulse point on his neck, and found that although weak it was still there. He was breathing, albeit his breaths were shallow and slightly ragged. Finally she checked this man with the force, and gasped as great warmth flowed over her, as if she had been submerged in a pool of warm water. The disturbance in the force was coming from him. All of that raw power was coming from him. It was like a burst dam. She looked around, and knew she had to get him out of this tree. She needed more space to try and heal him. Alya was not a healer. She was nowhere near as well trained as Barriss, but she was good enough to deliver first aid. Quickly she stood, reignited her lightsaber and cut a much larger hole through the bark, easily large enough for her to drag this young human through. When that was done she grabbed a hold of his clothes and pulled. She cursed, he was quite heavy, and she wasn't physically strong thanks to her slender frame. In combat she relied more on her speed than brute force. Finally she managed to drag him from the trunk, and gently set him down on the forest floor. She fell into a sitting position for a moment, silently trying to catch her breath. The humidity of the atmosphere, coupled with her 15-minute force-propelled run, and her efforts in dragging this young man to open ground had taxed her. She was covered in sweat, and her breath was leaving her in quick gasps. Her master was right. She definitely needed to train more. As Alya rested she took the time to study the human she had pulled from the tree. He was quite handsome. His hair was a shoulder-length mass of dark blonde spikes, framing a rounded tanned face. 2 sets of whisker marks adorned his cheeks, giving him an air of the exotic about him. While she was dragging him out, Alya had gotten a good feel of his body under the clothes, and found that he was well muscled. She had seen him before, but where? The vision, this was the man from her vision. His clothes were strange. A pair of dark green khaki pants and long-sleeved jacket with a sleeveless, armored combat vest over it. On his feet was a pair of black sandals, and tied around his forehead was a headband of black cloth, the metal plate adorned with a mass of swirling lines which reminded her of a leaf. Over his clothes he wore a long trench coat, red with black flames on the cuffs and hem, and a massive scroll had been attached to the small of his back, which she had removed and set to the side before she set him down. Taking another deep breath she kneeled beside him, and leaning down pressed the side of her head against his chest, hearing for his heartbeat. There it was, beating a little slow, but it didn't show any signs of convulsing. Releasing a breath she leaned back, and felt his pulse again. It was stronger than last time, and his breathing was becoming steady and continuous. Suddenly a hand shot up, grabbing onto her slender wrist with an iron grip. She gasped under the pressure, and fearfully looked at his face to see his eyes open. Beautiful azure orbs with slit pupils looked around manically before settling on her. They widened in confusion, and she guessed that he had never seen a Twi'lek before. She tensed, expecting him to strike. It was not unusual for someone in his condition to unconsciously lash out. Instead of attacking her or panicking, he smiled a sad smile and spoke in a voice that slowly got weaker with every word. "Well, looks like my luck's improved. At least the angel they sent for me is beautiful." She blinked at his words as he passed out, and allowed a small smile to grace her lips. During and before the war she had undertaken many undercover missions for both the Jedi and the Republic, and had been on the receiving end of plenty of such comments. But the men from before were usually sleazy underworld mobsters, mercenaries, slavers or enemy soldiers looking for a quick romp. This man spoke as if he was dying. She frowned. Why did he believe he was dead? His life signs were all stabilizing at an impressive rate. Reassured that the young man would be fine, and would awaken on his own in a few minutes, she sat down, crossed her legs and decided to meditate. Perhaps try and find an answer as to why the force had led her to this strange human. He was obviously force-sensitive, as his very aura seemed like a beacon of energy to her senses. He didn't have the taint or heavy spiritual pressure of dark Jedi or Sith. A grunt of pain was her first indication that he was awake, and she opened her eyes to see this strange human sitting up, hand reaching up to rub his forehead. He didn't notice her, for his eyes were closed. Damn it, never expected to get a hangover in the afterlife. She frowned at his words. He really believed that he was dead. Slowly he started to get up, only to stagger when he made it to a knee. She moved to stop him with a worried glance, slender hands grabbing hold of his arm to anchor him. Easy there, you've taken a bad knock. The blonde flinched under her grasp, but she refused to remove her support. Gently Ayla set him down into a lying position again. He tried to open his eyes, but the light was too much for them and he hastily shut them, groaning in pain. She smiled, opened them slowly. That's it, there we go. Slowly Naruto opened his eyes, flinching under the harsh sunlight but refusing to close them. Blotches assaulted his sight and it took a minute for his eyes to adapt. He looked over at the woman kneeling beside him. Her voice carried a strange accent to it, almost enchanting to his hearing. But when he saw her he jumped in surprise. She wasn't human. She was tall and slender, dressed in skin-tight leather which left her stomach and arms bare, as well as giving him a nice view of some cleavage when she bent over to inspect him. Her skin was a dark shade of blue, cerulean maybe. A perfect face, full midnight blue lips, chocolate brown eyes. But the thing that surprised him the most was that instead of hair she had two long tails, extending down to the small of her back. Who are you? What are you? Naruto asked as he flipped to his feet, a kunai flying into his grasp thanks to the wrist-mounted storage device he held. The woman in turn jumped back through what looked like a chakra-propelled jump, and fell into a defensive stance, a slender right hand reaching for a cylindrical device on her left hip. She gripped it tightly, brought it forward and flipped a switch. A blade of pure blue energy came into existence with a snap hiss. Naruto frowned as he studied the weapon. He had never seen anything quite like it before, but he knew instinctively that it was deadly. He brought his kunai in front of him, falling into a defensive stance before this beautiful, yet strange alien creature. Please calm down. The woman seemed to plead in a strange, enchanting accent. I do not wish to harm you. He watched as this strange ethereal creature came down in a crouch, shutting off her weapon and placing it on the ground. She stood up, took a few careful steps back and raised her hands in surrender. He looked at her for a moment, wondering what she was playing at, before nodding her head and copying her movement, setting his kunai on the ground. Look, lady, he said suddenly, hand reaching up to scratch the back of his hand as he gave her a sheepish smile. You're not an angel by any chance, are you? She gave him a look, like she was wondering about his sanity. No. Why do you ask? So I guess that means I'm in hell? Not that I'm aware of, she muttered, suddenly sounding a little offended. He flinched slightly, usually when he heard that tone with a girl he was on the short list to a good ass-kicking. She made no such movements. He looked up, and azure eyes met dark chocolate. They stayed like that for the longest time. Two opponents sizing each other up. Then the woman sighed and spoke in her richly accented voice. You were disoriented, confused. She explained. I thought you were going to lash out at me. Naruto didn't lax on his guard. He had been met with many over the years who said they wished him no harm yet tried to kill him anyway when he was within range. So he had a wind-based jutsu ready for deployment if she became hostile. Instead she did something that surprised him. She advanced until she was within 2 meters of him and then sat cross-legged on the ground, looking up at him imploringly. Naruto stared at her for a long moment, before copying her gesture, sitting cross-legged on the ground 2 meters away from her yet remaining silent. Ever since the annihilation of Konoha he had been forced to learn many things about the outside world. But after a moment he took her form in again, eyes wide with the surprise and shock he felt when he saw her but a few moments ago. The woman, definitely a woman, saw his widened eyes and shocked expression and smiled a little nervously. I take it this is the first time you've seen someone like me before? He nodded dumbly. Ever since he had tamed the Kyuubi no Yoko, the 9-tailed demon fox, he had seen some incredible and terrifying things. He knew there were other intelligent creatures in the world. Orochimaru's snakes, Tsunade's slugs, the toads of Mount Myoboku, the demon fox clans who inhabited the dense forests of North Fire Country, only to name a few. But he had never seen anything quite like her before. His younger self would have panicked, flailed his arms around and demanded what she was. Basically make a complete idiot out of himself. But with age came patience, and with age came the ability to control your emotions and keep your mouth shut. So who are you? He asked at last, might as well start from the beginning. She looked at him for a moment. You first. Naruto frowned at her. I asked first. The woman seemed to think for a moment. I tell you what, I'll answer a question, and then you answer a question. Will that do? Naruto thought about it for a second, and shrugged, all right. The woman smiled at him, and despite the situation he couldn't help but return it. My name is Alya Sakura, Jedi Knight. Strange name, he found himself saying. And what is a Jedi Knight? She raised a hand with a mischievous smile, index finger wiggling right and left. I answered your question, now you answer mine. Naruto Uzumaki, former Jonin of Konohagakure no Sato. She stared at him for a moment, before bringing her hand up to her mouth, covering it as she giggled. And you said my name was strange? She started, before her features fell into a thoughtful expression. Hey, alright, your turn. I don't want to be rude. He started, scratching the back of his neck nervously. But what are you? She smiled, placing a hand against her chest. I am a Twi'lek, native to the planet Ryloth in the Outer Rim territories. Naruto blinked, both confused and bewildered by her answer, which left far more questions than answers. Twi'lek, Ryloth, Outer Rim, what are you talking about? You've never heard of any of this before? Ayla asked, genuinely surprised, unless he was teasing her. Almost everyone knew this information. Besides humans, Twi'leks were one of the most widespread races in the galaxy. There were populations of her people located on thousands of planets from the core worlds to the furthest reaches of the Outer Rim. Her people were nowhere near as widespread as the humans, but she had thought that almost every being in the galaxy had at least heard of them. Nope, first time hearing any of this. Naruto answered a little sheepishly. This only cemented his opinion that he was not in the deserts of Suna anymore. In fact, he had never seen anything remotely like the mushroom-shaped trees surrounding them. He knew that the collection of seals Madara used to destroy him were unstable. In fact, many seal masters had surmised that mixing two such high-powered fuinjutsu would be too dangerous to even try. Not even Orochimaru was mad enough to attempt it. Then again, the blonde had always wondered about the Uchiha's sanity. After all, what right-thinking individual would think colliding the moon with the earth was a good idea? Maybe the combined seals were not an explosive like he thought. Perhaps they created some kind of dimensional shift, throwing him from one reality to another. Alternate realities were theoretically possible. A stone in a stream created ripples. A different choice would lead someone on a new path. If I remember the rules of this little session, then you've already taken your turn. She frowned at him. No, I haven't. Yes, you have, Naruto pointed out with a mischievous smile. You asked me if I've ever heard of your people or whatever else you were talking about, so it's my turn. She glared at him for a moment, before sighing in defeat and waving him to continue. What is a Jedi Knight? A Jedi Knight is a rank for Jedi in the Jedi Order. When an apprentice or Padawan learner is considered ready in the eyes of his or her master, they would go through a set of trials, and if they passed, they were given the rank of Knight. Ayla explained, seeing understanding in the blonde human's eyes. And what is the Jedi Order? Naruto asked. He guessed these Jedi were some sort of warrior organization, like the shinobi from back home, and a knight was considered a similar rank to a Chunin-level shinobi. Ayla raised a delicate eyebrow, the only sign of hair on her body, he thought. It's my turn. He scratched the back of his head sheepishly. Sorry. Go ahead. What is a Jonin? It's a rank of warrior in the village I was originally from. Jonin is short for High Ninja, or High Shinobi. It is one of the highest ranks, and those who carry it are considered elite warriors. Naruto answered. The Twi'lek frowned a little, but nodded, allowing him to take the next question. What is the Jedi Order? Blythe frowned as he looked over the expansive forest from the cliff face. The column had been on the move for an hour before the weather took a turn for the worst. It started off as an increased humid breeze, then suddenly and with very little warning it began to rain. The rain was sudden and torrential, freezing cold drops of water pelting his armored suit. God, how he hated this planet. Felucia was a world of unpredictable weather. It could be hot and humid, with no sign of rain for weeks or even months. A rainstorm could come suddenly, usually only lasting an hour or two, but on the rare occasion it could last days, and become so heavy that it would kick up vast masses of mist. The commander had been on this hellhole for a month, and he still hadn't figured out this jungle world's weather patterns. He wasn't even sure what season it was. Soon the pelting rain was joined by jagged strikes of lightning and near-deafening crackles of thunder. Before long the ground was soaked, and slowly becoming a quagmire. His troops and machines were slugging through it, but it was a slow and arduous pace. If the separatists took the initiative and attacked them now, they would be at a disadvantage. Eventually he called for the column to halt and weather it out. The offensive against the separatist holdings had to be put on indefinite hold. Scouts were sent into the forest to keep watch for either separatist forces, or their wayward general. He had not heard from Sakura since she had taken off into the jungles, and he was becoming worried. Bly had tried to raise her on her personal communicator, but something in this storm was jamming communications, and all he had received was static. He couldn't even contact Commander Afi and the ARC troopers he sent ahead. They were on their own too. Commander, he turned to see one of his ARC captains, Briggs, standing behind him, fully garbed in his advanced recon armor, complete with red stripes along the helm, arms and legs, and dual blaster pistols holstered to his hip. Standing behind him was a line of 4 ARC troopers, the blue stripes representing their rank as lieutenants, hands holding the compact, scoped Wester M5 blaster rifles. It's been half a day and she's not back yet. Do we have your leave? Bly frowned for a moment, before nodding his head in agreement. Go. Bring her back before the storm ends. Yes, sir, the captain replied, and with a nod to his men took off into the hazy Felucian jungle. The storm had come suddenly and without warning, drenching her and her strange companion from head to toe before they were able to find shade under one of the larger mushroom-shaped trees. Slowly the storm got worse, and a light mist was starting to take shape, making visibility less than 20 meters. Ayla sneezed, and began to rub her sides with her hands in a desperate attempt to get warm. The raindrops that hit her skin were freezing cold. She let out a breath which became mist, and was just able to stop her teeth from clattering. Her leather clothes were soaked, meshing against her form and making her feel naked. Her skin was glistening from the rainwater, like she had been unceremoniously dunked into a pool. Funny how barely an hour ago it was boiling and now it was as cold as Arctic tundra. She spared a glance at her companion. He was soaked to the bone but didn't seem to care. His head was raised, azure eyes taking in the sudden dark storm clouds which blocked out the alien sun overhead. Water dripped from the edges of his blonde spikes in rivulets, matting them against his head, and continued to run down his face. Come on, Naruto's voice surprised her, and she turned to see him halfway inside the trunk of the tree, using the opening she cut just a few minutes before. It's freezing out here. At least in here we can stay dry. She nodded, followed him in and sat down at the other side of the tree, watching him set his huge scroll against the wall and lean against it, eyes closed as if he were about to fall asleep. She wasn't fooled though. A crackle of thunder seemed to explode from overhead, and she noticed him flinch ever so slightly. It seemed Naruto was a little afraid of thunderstorms. Ayla shook herself, sending droplets of water flying from her glistening form before leaning against the wall and closing her eyes. She felt cold, tired and weary, wishing that she had more clothes with her than what she had. She should have listened to Barris, going on and on about wearing a cloak or putting on some of the modified armor Bly made for her. Suddenly she felt a weight on her, and creaked open an eye to see Naruto's trench coat draped over her like a blanket. Naruto was kneeling beside her, looking at her for a moment before standing and walking back to his place at the other side of the trunk. She smiled at the small gesture. So he was a gentleman. Unconsciously she curled up, wrapping the coat around her, and before she knew it she was fast asleep. She must have been tired. Barely a minute after he covered her with his coat, Naruto heard the light steady breathes, telling him that Ayla had fallen asleep. He wasn't surprised. When he awoke she had looked tired. He saw bags under her eyes, and weariness in her gaze, which meant that she hadn't slept well in a long time. Naruto looked through the opening, saw the storm worsen and heard the continuous pelting of the rain. He sighed, wasn't going anywhere in a hurry. Even he wasn't crazy enough to leave this shelter in the middle of such a storm. It made the ones he went through in Konoha look like pretty decent weather. Resigned that he was stuck here, he decided to study this strange alien woman across from him. There wasn't a lot of room in the trunk, and their feet were nearly touching. He had to admit that she was very beautiful, even if he had never seen anything quite like her before. What had Ayla called herself? Ah yes, a Twi'lek. Her face, relaxed in the bliss of sleep, was serene and beautiful, not a single blemish on her cerulean skin. Her mouth was partly opened, showing a glance of her white upper teeth. She snored, but it was soft and soothing, mainly breath exhaling and inhaling from her mouth. She was very slender, with long legs which seemed to stretch for an eternity, a flat stomach, flawless complexion, and a pair of mounds which seemed a little over a handful. He sighed, shaking the thoughts from his head. The skin-tight leather she wore left little to the imagination, but somehow he was still able to conjure it up. He half-heartedly cursed his deceased teacher for partially corrupting him. Naruto stayed up most of the night, keeping watch, watching the rise and fall of her chest and listening to the soft sounds she made in her sleep. She was mesmerizing to look at, and he bet Jiraiya, God rest his soul, would have tried to recruit her for his research once he got over the initial shock. He chuckled at the thought. Eventually the rain stopped, and after a moment to make sure that the storm had truly ended, he stood and made his way back out into the open. The sun was peeking through the slowly dispersing dark clouds, and it looked like it was going to be a hot day. When Ayla awoke, the sun was creeping through the opening and the continuous pelting of the rain was gone. She sat up, wiping the gum from her eyes before stretching her muscles. Ayla was surprised by how tired she had to be to fall asleep like that, and chided herself for knocking herself out in the presence of a man she did not know. For all she knew, he was a separatist spy. She stood, folding Naruto's long coat as she walked over to the opening and peeked outside. There he was in the middle of the clearing. Ayla noted the katana in his hand, his stance and the way he carried it. He had stripped down to his pants and a black shirt, and for the first time Ayla took in his physique. The muscles were lean, telling her they were gained through hard work instead of the sterile environment of a gym. He was sweating from his exertions, the odd trickle flying from his hair and skin every time he made a sudden move. Naruto had been training for a while. He was obviously a practitioner of sword fighting, something which outside of force organizations like the Jedi or Sith was quite rare. She watched him begin a set of forms, movements graceful and light like a dancer. He spun, ducked, and danced as if he were fighting an invisible foe, his sword swishing and blurring in a series of slashes, stabs and strokes which were done with such finesse she considered he would be a match to quite a few Jedi battlemasters. Gently she stepped through the opening and sat down, content to watch him go through the forms of his sword art. It was an art she was unfamiliar with, and was intrigued as she watched him go through the stances with ease born of practice. Finally he stopped, finishing his form and sheathing his sword in a quick motion. He was panting heavily, but he was smiling. "Did you rest well?" "Yes, thank you for the coat." She smiled as he approached her, telekinetically grasping the towel hanging from a branch beside her and sending it drifting towards him. Naruto caught it with ease, and looked at her with a wry smile. He was confused about something though. "That's an interesting ability. I'm a telekinetic," she explained as she rose to her feet, studying him. "I've heard of those. You can move things with your mind," he said as he wiped the sweat from his brow. "Yes," Ayla replied, still noticing that something was wrong. He wasn't very good at hiding it. She doubted those expressive blue eyes could hide anything. But underneath she felt a maelstrom of confusion and uncertainty. "Naruto, what's wrong? What do you mean?" he asked, a little guardedly. "I'm also an empath," Ayla explained, and upon his slightly confused look she sighed. "It means I can also read emotions." "You feel troubled," he sighed, and it took a moment of silence before he answered. Ayla had only known the man for a few hours, and the questions and answers session they shared only added more, well, questions than answers. But she felt through the force that he was a good man, strong and brave, with good intentions to anyone who met him. But she also felt that he had been hurt badly in his life, not physically but emotionally. Everything is so confusing to me right now. I'm guessing that I'm not on my home world anymore, yet I don't know where to look or even if it exists. I suppose I can say that I'm scared." He chuckled sadly. "Nah, scared isn't the right word. I'm terrified. You're in a strange place, with people you have never met from races you've never seen. Ayla spoke up, her voice soft as she rose to her feet and walked over to him. Everything around you is of the unknown, and it terrifies you, am I right? He looked nervous, almost like he was about to bolt, but nodded his head. I'm not going to lie to you, Naruto, she continued, placing a hand on his broad shoulder. He was a full head taller than her, which was rare considering she was quite tall herself. There will be much out there you will not understand, and it will frighten you. But I'll make you a promise. I'll stay with you, be your guide and help you find a way home. Okay? He nodded, a small smile gracing his lips. Thank you, Ayla. She grinned, you're welcome. Her head suddenly darted to the right, just as a group of individuals came through the thick underbrush, wearing some kind of white armor, colored stripes adorning the surface. One, with crimson stripes on his helm and arms, stepped forward, and saluted sharply. There you are, ma'am. You had us worried there for a moment. Captain Briggs, Ayla greeted with a smile and a nod, before looking ever so slightly guilty. I'm sorry. I sent you and your men on a wild chase, didn't I? The captain nodded, before his helm turned to Naruto's direction. And who is this? He's that disturbance I decided to look in on. Ayla replied, don't worry, he's not a separatist spy. Just a young man a long way from home. Very well, General, Briggs answered. He was obviously not convinced but was going to follow his commanding officer's orders. I'll just tell the commander you're all right. Ayla nodded, before turning back to Naruto, let's go get your stuff. Naruto nodded, turning around and allowing his new acquaintance to lead the way back to their tree. Within a minute he had picked up his summoning scroll and was being escorted back by this strange woman and her elite ARC troopers. It was all kind of surreal. These men, their armor, their weapons were all alien to him. He wondered how these black objects could be dangerous. There were no blades or any sealed tags on them. Maybe this was because he was a shinobi, and his kind fought in the shadows and on high ground, attacking from different angles and striking from the most obscure places. He didn't bother to look at a regular army and how they fought and deployed. Shinobi fought their own wars, their own battles. He heard a small whistling noise and turned his head to the captain. Noticing him sling his weapon and reaching into his loincloth, pulling out a small disc-shaped object and flicking a switch. A small figure appeared, maybe between 10 and 20 millimeters in height. It reminded him of that holographic jutsu the Akatsuki used to remain in contact. The figure spoke, voice raspy. Execute Order 66. It will be done, my lord. Naruto suddenly felt a very bad feeling settle at the pit of his stomach. Unconsciously he reached for his right thigh pouch, pulling out a couple of kunai and imbuing them with wind chakra just as the soldier deactivated his disc and unslung his weapon. Briggs walked back in line, shared a look with his fellow troopers and calmly nodded his head. As one, all five unslung their weapons and held them at the ready, pointing them at Ayla's back. Watch out. In light of the Jedi Rebellion and the continued threat of the Separatists, it was decided in a landslide vote that the Galactic Republic is to be reformed into the First Galactic Empire for continued stability and peace within the galaxy. Beloved leader Chancellor Dantius Palpatine was unanimously elected as the first Galactic Emperor. Watch out. Naruto moved with speed, diving through the air and colliding with the Jedi Knight, sending the two of them sprawled on the forest floor in a heap. He heard several strange pangs and saw streaks of crimson light flash past the spot where Ayla stood just a moment ago. It didn't matter that those weapons didn't have blades, they were deadly. Ayla flipped to her feet, that strange energy sword igniting in her hands just in time to block a handful of those crimson streaks, sending a few back at the men who were firing them. Naruto didn't quite get what was going on, but he knew which side of the field he was on. Quickly the blonde threw his wind-imbued kunai, watching with some grim satisfaction as one pierced right into an ARC trooper's throat, sending blood spattering across the ground. The remaining four began to spread out, their focus still on his comrade as she continued to deflect those strange energy blasts. They were going to try and catch her in a crossfire, hoping that their weapons would overwhelm her defenses. Naruto could tell that she was confused, and his suspicion was proven when she spoke. Captain, what is the meaning of this? Briggs didn't answer, instead he fired another volley at the Jedi Knight, forcing her to take a step back as she continued to block with her blue energy sword. They had almost completely forgotten about Naruto, probably thought his kunai was one of their crimson bolts deflected back at the user. That would be their last mistake. Still crouched, he brought his hands together in a cross-shaped sign, and taking a deep breath surged his chakra, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. There was an explosion of white smoke, and before the ARC troopers knew it, they found themselves surrounded by 20 perfect clones of him. The shadow clones didn't wait for the smoke to disperse, and threw themselves into the battle, katana and kunai drawn and ready to attack. These soldiers were well trained though, and with almost lightning-fast reflexes spun around and fired full salvos of crimson energy into the throng of clones, taking out 5 before the rest began jumping in chakra-propelled leaps, rushing across the tree trunks and tossing a small cloud of kunai and shuriken. An ARC fell back, blood gushing from a kunai embedded in his neck. Another stumbled as several shuriken dug into his plate, but failed to puncture the armor. He shrugged it off and bringing his weapon up began firing again. 2 more clones exploded in puffs of white smoke, the crimson lances piercing them. Naruto grit his teeth. He needed to get closer, needed to turn this fight into one of taijutsu and kenjutsu. Ayla flew forward, lightsaber in hand, ducking under the captain's weapon and neatly cut the barrel in half. The officer stumbled back, and the Jedi took full advantage, fluidly coming forward to separate his head from his shoulders. The helm flew far into the forest, vanishing from sight. 3 down, 2 to go. A million questions threatened to overtake her mind as she fought. Chief among them was why had her own soldiers turned against her like this? What the hell could have happened for an elite ARC team to suddenly turn on her? Then there was Naruto, who had just shown a number of abilities she had never heard of before. This young man had just shown that he could kill an elite ARC trooper with nothing more than a throwing knife and had created nearly 20 illusions of himself to combat the forces against him. It wasn't his usage of the force, it felt like something deeper, tied to his own body like a second energy. He had called upon it, and created this mass of illusions to confront her now turncoat troopers. Only advanced masters could use the force in such a way, if he was even using the force at all. Then she watched as the last 10 fell on the clones, and plunged kunai and shuriken into their bodies. Her breath caught and her flowed. Those were not illusions. They were solid, deadly clones. Not even advanced masters of the force were capable of such feats. The 10 copies stood up, leaving the ARC troopers unmoving on the forest floor. There was an explosion of white smoke as the clones dispelled, leaving only the original Naruto standing in the middle of a circle of corpses. He approached her, sheathing his katana into the sheath at the small of his back. What the hell was that? She shook her head, eyes refusing to leave Briggs' headless body. I have no idea. The captain got a message, Naruto said as he came within a few feet of the Jedi Knight. A figure dressed in a black robe told him to execute Order 66. Order 66, Ayla repeated the word with a frown. She had never heard of such an order, but the words left a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. Was this an isolated incident, just a squad of turncoats trying to assassinate her? Or was this happening in other places as well? What about Barris and the 3 Padawans? She exploded into motion with force-propelled speed, shooting across the clearing and into the trees in a blur. Naruto stared after her, frowning, before he gathered the chakra into the soles of his feet and took off after her. He jumped high, landing on a branch and took off after her from the tree branches. Ayla was fast, and he doubted he would have been able to keep up if he was running on the ground. She ran for 10, maybe 20 minutes through the underbrush before coming to a clearing, skidding to a halt in the last line of trees before looking over the clear expanse. She knew her fellow knight was here. Ayla had been friends with the younger woman since they were both Padawans in the temple and had memorized her signature in the Force. Naruto dropped down beside her as Ayla leaned forward, put her hands on her knees and took several breaths. Barris stood several meters ahead of a small line of regular clone troopers, the huge hulking form of an AD-RT slowly advancing through the wilderness. At the young knight's feet was the sparking wreckage of a dozen battle droids, her green-bladed lightsaber lit and held in her right hand. She smiled. Maybe it was an isolated incident after all. Why would their own soldiers turn on them for no reason? She raised her hand and started to wave to her friend, calling out her name to get her attention, Barris. The woman turned, dark eyes studying the expanse of forest. Barris saw her, smiled and made to move towards her. Naruto caught a round face of tanned skin, dark markings on her cheeks and the bridge of her nose. Her hair was black and shoulder-length. He mused for a moment if all women in the Jedi Order were beautiful. It happened in a blur. One moment her friend was walking towards her, closing down her lightsaber. The next she disappeared in an explosion of flame, her body encompassed by wildfire as the main gun of the AT-RT fired on her. Ayla looked on, eyes wide in horror as her friend's life vanished from the Force. "No," she whispered, taking a step back and stumbling. Naruto looked on with the same horror as the Twi'lek Jedi beside him. The sound of a snap, followed by a hiss, brought his attention back to the real world, and he saw Ayla with an ignited lightsaber in her hand and anger in her eyes. The line of soldiers saw them and opened fire with their weapons, pelting the tree line with a storm of crimson lances. The gun on the back of the four-legged artillery tank swiveled round in their direction. Naruto acted on instinct. He grabbed Ayla before she charged and ran back into the forest as fast as he could, ignoring the zings of energy which soared past, leaving burn marks on the trees and rocks all around him. Ayla struggled against him at first, but eventually relented and allowed him to drag her away. He ran with chakra-enhanced speed for a handful of moments, and only stopped when he no longer heard the zings and dings of weapons fire. He turned to find himself tackled to the ground, hitting the dirt hard, the breath exploding from his lungs as he was straddled. He heard the continuous hum, felt the harsh heat and looked at the tip of the Jedi Knight's lightsaber. Ayla glared menacingly down at him with clouded-over eyes, breath coming and going in heated, angry pants. Her voice filtered into his hearing, harsh yet hoarse. "Why did you stop me?" Naruto fought for breath as he spoke, azure eyes not leaving her violent chocolate. "If you ran out there, then you would have been as good as dead. I would have handled it," she roared angrily. "No you wouldn't," he shouted back, taking in a last gulp of air before continuing. "You would have been gunned down just like Barriss was." They heard voices coming from the direction they came, and knew that the company of troopers were giving chase through the forest. Ayla jumped up, lightsaber at the ready to fight, but Naruto jumped up with her, grabbing her shoulder and making her look into his eyes. There was a storm of emotion brewing in those dark orbs, pain, disbelief, anger and betrayal, and it threatened to tear her apart. "You can't fight them," he said, voice soft yet carrying a hint of steel behind it. "If you go against them the way you are now, then you will die. You will take a fair lot of them with you, but you will die, and then who would be left who knows the truth? Do you think Barriss would want you to rush off to your own death like this?" She glared at him for a handful of heartbeats before violently shaking her head. She was right there. Her voice was a whisper, but when she looked at him again, all the betrayal and anger was replaced with grief. Her friend had been incinerated right before her eyes. She was right in front of me and I couldn't do a thing about it. Her head darted to the right suddenly. The Padawans. Naruto knew from his discussion with her that Padawans were considered apprentices within the ranks of the Jedi, and caught her attention before she went running into the forests again. The turncoats were still a good way away from them. "Where are they?" Her head snapped round to look at him, and taking a deep breath to calm herself, Ayla spoke. "They were leading a company to a separatist communications outpost, some 5 clicks to the east." Naruto nodded, and offered a brave smile. "Let's go get them then." She nodded and the two took off into the jungle at near superhuman speeds. Ayla gathering the force to blur through the underbrush while Naruto jumped to the treetops in a chakra-propelled leap and began skipping from branch to keep up with her. They left the advancing line of soldiers behind with minimal effort. Jedi and shinobi ran through the forest at high speed, not stopping or faltering for the entire journey to their destination. Naruto was the first to see the outpost, a large structure of dark metal reaching up through the forest. A large dish of some description rested on the flat roof, reaching up to the sky. It was embedded in an outcropping of rock, the only entrance being a set of doors in the middle of a clearing. He came to a stop on the second last line of trees, Ayla landing beside him, and together the two watched the activity below. There were at least 30 clone troopers in the clearing. 20 were scouring around, picking up the remains of separatist battle droids and throwing them into a pile in the center of the clearing. Another 10 were standing in a line at attention before the entrance of the communications outpost. It looked like a deadly number of soldiers for only 2 combatants. Ayla didn't think so. She jumped from the branch, lightsaber activating in her hands as she flew through the air. She had easily jumped 20, maybe 30 meters across the clearing. She brought her lightsaber down as she fell and cleaved a clone in half. She then spun around, a second lightsaber igniting in her free hand as she danced and spun, striking down clone after clone with lethal accuracy. 6 of the 9 guards had fallen to her blades before the other 20 realized what was going on, and the last 3 were taken down as they went for their weapons. It was just as the first raised them for the Jedi that a voice echoed through the air, "Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu." The 20 troopers turned to the noise just in time to see a huge cloud of smoke descend on the entire northern line of trees, and exploding through the smog were hundreds of Narutos, all running towards the surprised clone troopers, katana and kunai drawn like a horde of warriors from the ancient stories. Ayla barely gave it a glance. All she cared about was getting to the Padawans before the clones did. The Jedi Knight stood before the sealed doors and with the Force forced them open with a snap as locks were broken in a mechanical whine as the blast doors were pushed aside. She walked into the main chamber of the outpost, and was immediately forced to deflect blaster bolts as a squad of 9 clone troopers opened fire. Ayla did not hesitate. She spun her twin lightsabers, one blue the other green in a protective veil in front of her, deflecting every bolt and dispatching the clones with quick and precise strikes. She walked calmly yet cautiously, the darkened corridors illuminated by the dim multicolored light emitted from her lightsabers. Another squad of clones rounded the corner, 3 falling on their knees and aiming their blasters while the other 3 stood behind them, creating 2 lines of blaster rifles. Ayla reached out with the Force and sent the entire squad sprawling with a telekinetic push. The first line of 3 slammed into the second, sending all 6 slamming into the durasteel wall. The 3 behind hit the wall with a crack before they were flattened by the first line. The first line stumbled forward in a daze only to be cut down by her 2 lightsabers. She broke off into a run as she rounded the corner, blades spinning as she cut down another clone, then another, and another as she ran. By the time she reached the main comm chamber she had left a trail of dead and dying clone troopers in her wake. She entered without hesitation and looked at the carnage within. Score marks covered the walls and the intense smell of ozone was ripe in the air. The first Padawan she saw was Ekria, lying against the main communications console, blaster burns on her back. The computer slicer must have been seated on the comm console when the clones burst in and shot her. The other 2, Zonder and Barris's own apprentice Drake Logan, looked like they made a better fight of it. Zonder lay face down on the floor, the bodies of 3 clones surrounding him. The Solonian was slumped against the wall, chest burned through with first-degree burns, lightsaber just out of his reach. They were dead, all 3 of them. Ayla stumbled back as she surveyed their bodies, suddenly wishing that this was all a bad dream. Barris wasn't dead, the Padawans weren't dead. The world wasn't falling apart around her. This was all a nightmare she would wake up from. She heard the stomping of footfalls and spun around to see Gale firing his blaster. She tried to move, but was too late as the crimson bolt struck her in the stomach. Ayla hissed in pain, smelling the burning of her flesh as the momentum sent her spinning around before hitting the floor hard, lightsabers flying from her grasp. She gripped the burning flesh of her abdomen, gritting her teeth against the pain. Ayla looked up to see the clone commander towering over her, blaster pistol drawn and aimed for her head. She looked up at him, eyes full of a mass of emotions. She knew it was futile, but she did it anyway. Her voice was on the verge of breaking as she looked at the emotionless helmet of a man she would have trusted her life with. "Why?" the clone spoke, voice distorted by his helmet speaker. "Nothing personal, General, just orders." Suddenly Naruto was there, grabbing the commander's arm and pulling him around to face him. The blonde glared at the white armored soldier before slamming a ball of condensed, spiraling blue energy into his abdomen. Ayla looked at the energy, and besides her pain she couldn't believe her eyes. It was the Force-given substance, the boy's own interior reserves of energy feeding the attack. Rasengan. The armor struck by the ball cracked and caved in, and an explosion of spiraling wind threw Gale back against the far wall of the chamber, slamming into it with enough force to leave a crater in the durasteel. The power behind it was enough to break bones and sever cartilage, yet the commander was dragging himself slowly to his feet. Naruto didn't miss a beat, walking towards the clone, drawing his katana and ending his opponent's life in a quick swing, severing Gale's head from his shoulders. The blonde flicked his blade, sending blood spattering across the pristine floor before sheathing it in a smooth motion. He was at her side in a heartbeat, quickly wrapping his arms around her and lifting her off the floor. "We need to go now." He knew she had lost consciousness when he rushed out the door and down the corridor, ignoring the crumpled bodies of soldiers that littered the floor. The blonde knew more would be coming. He didn't know how he knew, but deep down he knew. Naruto also knew, deep down, that he would not be able to outrun them at his current speed. He had used up a great deal of his chakra when he called up an army of hundreds of Kage Bunshin. Add to that him traveling across nearly 50 kilometers worth of terrain, forming a Rasengan and fighting off a small army of enemy soldiers. He was nearly spent. There were two abilities in his arsenal that he could use. One was to call upon the powers of his tenant. He had fully mastered the fox's chakra thanks to his mother, God bless her soul. The other was to call upon his sage mode, but that would tax his chakra to the point of exhaustion. Fox's chakra it is then. He called upon it. The warmth started in his belly, and then exploded out across his entire body. Within moments he was encompassed by his fully formed cloak of electric blue energy, black runes and seals appearing along his arms and chest. The cloak flared as he took off in a blur of speed, flying down the corridors with the only sign of his passage being a yellow flash. He exploded from the entrance and vanished into the trees at speeds no human being could possibly match. To the assembling clone troopers, all they saw was a blur of crimson shoot past them, followed by a mass of dust which blinded their vision. To Naruto the trees blurred by him, becoming nothing more than an almost inconceivable mass of merging colors. He didn't know how long he kept running until he felt the life in his arms begin to dim. He looked down to see the woman terribly pale, blood dribbling from the sides of her mouth from internal bleeding. She was dying. He skidded to a halt, and willed the cloak of demonic energy to recede. Gently he set her down on the ground and immediately brought his hands together over the burn, ignoring her whimper of pain. He concentrated the chakra like he was taught, and his hands slowly took on a soothing green glow. What he saw worried him. It wasn't just the first-degree burns on her skin, but her organs, primarily her stomach and kidneys, were also badly burned and bleeding. Another inch and they would have been liquidized. What kind of weapon could do such a thing? "Come on, don't you dare die on me. You promised you'd help me get back, didn't you?" He poured his healing chakra into the wounds, and found that even though they were healing, it would be too little too late to save her. Naruto grit his teeth. No matter how hard he tried, everyone who tried to help him died. Sakura, Hinata, Kakashi, Tsunade, Karabi, Shikamaru, Kiba, Neji, Yamato, to only name a few. The list went on. They all died and he was powerless. Now here was a woman who had found him in the middle of an alien forest, who kept him calm and promised to help him, and here she was, dying in his arms, and he was powerless. There was only one option. Okay, concentrate my chakra, direct it to where it's needed the most. The warm light slowly spread across his arms, through his hands and into Ayla's wound. He watched with a grim determination as instead of harming her further, it began to heal. The horrific burns on her kidneys and stomach lessened, blood vessels reattached, the bleeding stopped. He felt the light which was her life slowly brighten again. Quickly he picked Ayla off the ground and, cradling her in his arms, began running through the forest again, away from the army that wanted to kill her, and by extension him. He rushed through the forests, trying to ignore the blaster bolts as they zoomed past him, impacting all around him. The Jedi grimaced. He had been running for hours. The clones had turned on them, betrayed them. He had felt Master unduly die, had felt countless Jedi across the galaxy die. He had felt his apprentice vanish through the Force. Avenge Ayla, mourn Ayla. A blaster bolt struck the tree bark beside him, barely a few inches from his head. His pursuers had not relented. He had been able to whittle down their numbers with traps, but they continued on. He should not be surprised. These were ARC troopers, the elite commando forces of the Grand Army of the Republic. Now only one remained, one last ARC trooper. If only he had more strength he could take him, but he was hurting. The blast which should have killed him didn't, instead leaving him badly burned but still alive, and still mobile. He jumped high, landing on a tree branch and fading into the shadows. Watching as his last living pursuer came within his vision, the captain of the unit sent to eliminate him. "Game's over, Jedi," he called over the silence. "Show yourself and die quick and painless, or I call in an airstrike, and not just you but the village nearby will all die. It's your call." He cursed, disbelieving that he had ever trusted this man. He could probably escape, but the Wookiee population would be massacred. He made his decision, and withdrew his lightsaber. The clone was within range, just one more step. With a roar he ignited his lightsaber and jumped. The commander looked up and, raising his blaster, fired. Ayla awoke with a start, sitting up and wincing at the pain. She was breathing heavily, exposed skin covered in sweat. The knight placed a hand against her chest, and took several deep, calming breaths to bring herself under control. After one last breath she looked around, seeing that she was inside some kind of tent. Her abdomen had been bandaged and her lightsabers were set in a corner nearby. She looked around in confusion, before her memories caught up with her. Barriss vanishing in a ball of fire, Ekria and her fellow Padawans massacred by their own troopers, herself turned on by the ARC troopers sent to retrieve her. She grasped onto her knees and laid her chin against them, a single tear running down her cheek. This was not an isolated incident. Somehow she knew it in her heart. Suddenly the galaxy felt like a darker place. "You're awake." She looked up to see a familiar head of blonde hair and was relieved when she saw Naruto poking his head through the opening to the outside. He smiled, "Thank the sage. You were touch and go for a while." "Naruto," she said his name with a little relief. "Where are we?" "Deep within the forests," the blonde replied. "I must have run for hours." "Don't worry, we're at least 100 kilometers from the battle site. I doubt they'll look this far." She realized that she was not within a tent, but a hollowed-out tree, just like the one she had found him in. "How long have I been out?" He looked her in the eyes. "About 2 days. You were really badly hurt, Ayla." "It was pure luck. I remembered those silly healing jutsu Granny and Sakura taught me, otherwise you wouldn't have survived." "Is that what you call those abilities?" she asked, her memory of what he did slowly returning to her. "Naruto, you made over 100 solid copies of yourself. You annihilated an entire company of battle-hardened clone troopers. You created a solid attack of force energy without calling upon the dark side. What are you?" He had the gall to look sheepish. "You took out a third of their number yourself, so I couldn't take all the credit. As for the clones, it was more like 200, but hey, who's counting, and that ball of energy is a pretty well-known attack for people in my line of work." "And who are people of your line of work?" she asked incredulously. He laughed without humor. "A people who were ruthlessly destroying themselves. Come out when you're ready." He hopped through the opening then, leaving the young Jedi alone with her thoughts. She once again leaned against the bark, drawing her legs up and resting her head against her knees. This was not an isolated incident. When she was fighting against the clones she had felt more than just Barriss' death, hers was just the closest. There were other deaths, lives of people she knew, fellow Jedi, their familiar auras winking out one at a time. The deaths she felt, the lives that winked from existence, hit her like a slap to the face, again, and again, and again. Every death of a friend, of a loved one had hit her, and when she had reached the outpost, saw the clones, and thought of the Padawans, she snapped. She had seen red when she jumped from the tree branch, lightsaber igniting. She had roared a guttural shriek full of the burning emotions of betrayal, pain and grief. At that moment, as she hit the ground and cut down clone troopers left and right, she had touched the dark side, gave in to her emotions, and just let her lightsabers fly. She didn't stop. Every blur of white armor was mercilessly cut down as she searched through the communications building for the 3 teenage Padawans. When she found them, saw their bodies lying lifelessly on the ground, burned by blaster bolts and eyes lifeless to the world. In that moment she had been ruthlessly flung back into reality, regaining her mind from the dark swirl of emotions. She had stared in horror at their bodies, and turned around to see Gale shoot her in the belly. Questions flew through her mind. Why would they do this? The clones and Jedi had fought side by side for 3 years. They had fought together, bled together and died together. She had considered Bly, Gale and the other officers of the Star Corps to be her comrades, her friends, and they had all just turned and tried to kill her. "Nothing personal, General, just orders," Gale said that, just after he shot her in the stomach and towered over her, pistol pressed against her temple, ready to finish the job. Order? What kind of order would make the troopers turn on her? What could be happening back on Coruscant for such an order to be given? She knew the High Council was planning to confront the Chancellor to relinquish his powers if Master Kenobi defeated General Grievous on Utapau. Ayla knew the Jedi Master, and knew he was more than capable of taking the cyborg monster down. Slowly Ayla stood on wobbly legs and almost staggered through the opening to the outside. Naruto sat near a small campfire, cooking some kind of reptile on a makeshift spit of metal. She mused on where he got the cooking utensils, but found herself unable to ask. She staggered over and fell into a sitting position across from him, her eyes on the ground. A wooden stake, pierced with a slab of meat, was presented before her, and she eyed it for a moment before looking up. Naruto stood over her, a worried frown on his face as he held out the food. "You need to eat something, Ayla. You haven't eaten anything in 2 days." She nodded absently, fingers closing around the stick. She whispered thanks in a hoarse whisper before taking a small, tentative bite of her meal. Naruto sat down beside her as she finished. "I need to check your wound." She allowed his hands to slowly unravel the bandages around her stomach, wincing in pain as the burn marks stuck against the last of the bandages. He discarded the roll, and she noticed dried blood on the white cloth. "Lie down for me." She complied without question, and watched as he inspected the blackened skin of the blaster burn, now a couple of days old. He gently pressed his fingers against the skin, asking her where it hurt. For a second Ayla felt like a child, but she visibly relaxed under his soft voice, soothing to her. Her stomach still hurt, but not as badly as she thought. "Hold still," Naruto ordered softly, placing his hands against her burnt skin. Ayla looked on, confused only for her eyes to widen as his hands were encompassed by a soft green glow. It felt like he had placed a warm balm on her burn, and the pain receded further. She looked at his face to see it as a mask of concentration, eyes focused with such intensity that she felt her cheeks darken. Finally he took a deep breath, and removed his hands. "I was right. You did take a bad hit. Your stomach and kidneys have been badly burned. I was able to heal most of it, but you won't be able to do anything too strenuous for a while." He asked her to sit up, and quickly replaced the bandages around her stomach. After he was finished, the two of them sat in a companionable silence. It was night, Ayla realized, and a canopy of some kind had been placed over the campfire. As the silence resumed, Ayla kept remembering what had happened barely a few days before. She shouldn't feel this way. She had seen many friends and comrades die in this awful war. What made this so different? It wasn't the first friend she saw incinerated by an artillery bolt, or the first time she witnessed her fellow Jedi lying dead on the ground. What changed? Who killed them was what changed. They weren't killed by Sith, Dark Jedi, or the armies of the Separatist Confederacy. They were killed by their own clone troopers. They had turned around and stabbed them all in the back. Dark emotions from before threatened to resurface: betrayal, anger, pain, sorrow, and pure unadulterated grief. She took a deep, shuddering breath, and brutally slammed it all down. "You know you can let it out." Naruto's voice roused her, and her head darted in his direction. "It's not good for your health to keep things bottled up. Believe me, I've been there quite a few times." She was surprised by the quivering in her voice, and gritted her teeth, angry at herself. She shouldn't be breaking down like this. She was a Jedi Knight, damn it. "I don't know what you mean." He reached over and gently brushed his finger over the skin below her left eye, leaning back to show her the water dripping from his fingertip. Ayla reached up to her face, and found warm, salty water flowing down her cheeks. She was crying. It was then that she came to a realization. This was not a bad dream. This was not an isolated incident. She knew it in her very soul. In that moment Ayla had never felt so alone in her life. Ayla couldn't hold it in anymore. The tears fell without resistance. She was alone, all alone. Arms enveloped her, and before she knew it she was brought forward into a full embrace, a chin leaning against the top of her head. She was just able to make out Naruto's voice. "It's okay, just let it out." And she did. She buried her face into his chest and released a string of heavy, emotion-filled sobs which racked her body and stained the blonde's shirt. She cried for a long time, but as time went on her cries of sorrow became mild sobs, then sniffles and whimpers, followed by the sound of light breathing. She had cried herself to sleep. How long she was like this she didn't know, but when she woke up she found that she was still in Naruto's arms, his powerful azure eyes conveying to her his worry. "How long was I out?" "About an hour." She felt her cheeks burn, and released herself from his embrace. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean." "Naruto, thank you." "You're welcome, Ayla," he said with a smile before looking over at the campfire, the flames extinguished, meat's cold. She looked at him for a moment, before a small smile of her own curled her dark blue lips. She may have been betrayed, she may be the last Jedi alive, but she did not fear it as much as before, because this man was with her. Can I ask you a question? Sure. While we were fighting the clones, I saw you perform techniques and abilities which I have never seen before, and to be honest, some of the things you did terrified me. How are you able to do it? How can you create balls of energy with your hands? How can you create a small army of copies? She looked him in the eyes, her voice showing no fear or hesitation. He was amazed she seemed so strong only an hour after she broke down. Naruto, what are you? Naruto smiled widely. Do you want to learn how to do the things I do? I promise it will be an enlightening experience. Ayla could not believe it. He was willing to share what he knew with her. They had only known each other for a day, and when she was in her time of need he had been there for her, protected her, and saved her life at least 3 times since they had met. Why did he go so out of his way for her, a total stranger? Why would you do all of this for me? Naruto smiled a genuine smile. Because when you woke me up I thought I was looking up at an angel. I still do. You're a good person, Ayla. You only do what you do for the better of those around you, and you did not deserve such a fate. She blushed at his words. How could she not? He had just said that he considered her an angel. She was unaware as he rose to his feet, and offered her his hand. You promised me you'd help me find my way back home, didn't you? Call me a chauvinist, but that showed me who you are, and it makes me want to protect you. I'll teach you how I move, how I fight, and in return you help me find a way home. What do you say? Her blush strengthened as she took his hand. Bly watched on as the Chancellor's form came into existence, barely 20 centimeters tall yet held with such authority that it was impossible to deny him. Report on your progress, Commander. Bly straightened as he reported. We were able to kill Jedi Knight Barriss Offee, as well as the 3 Padawan learners. However, the fate of Jedi Knight Ayla Secura is unknown. We know she was shot in the stomach, but we're unable to determine whether she is dead or not. The Chancellor stared at him, and even though his cowl was raised to cover his face, the commander knew it was not a look of satisfaction. Explain. Bly complied. Clone Commander Gale faced off against General Secura and was able to shoot her in the abdomen. Before he could finish the job he was attacked and killed by an unknown assailant. The man was able to escape with her in full view of a company of troopers. The 20 centimeters tall form seemed to think for a moment before he raised his head. Commander Bly, you are to continue to hunt down Jedi Knight Ayla Secura until you present her body to me. I will be sending a unit of the Inquisitorius to help you in your investigation. Spare no expense. Level the forest if you have to, but find her. Bly bowed. It will be done, my lord. It was a surreal experience to be in the shoes of a teacher. It was even more surreal to be teaching a woman who was at least 3 years his senior and was fully capable of sending him flying with a thought. Yet here he was, sitting cross-legged on the forest floor, looking at the beautiful form of Ayla Secura, who likewise was seated cross-legged right in front of him. He was teaching her for many reasons, the most of which was that he knew she needed something to get her mind off what had happened to her over the last week. Being betrayed by your comrades, seeing your friends die, it was something that left a hole in you. He knew this all too well. Right, so let's get started. The first thing I am going to have to do is check to see if you have a chakra circulatory system. He said with a slightly nervous smile, reaching out with his hand. Ayla blinked, before taking his in hers, marveling at how large his calloused hand was compared to her slender one. He pumped a little of his chakra through his arm and into her. It was like someone had hit a light switch to a power grid not used in years. The natural reserves in her body flickered before flowing through the mass of chakra pathways, activating what had laid dormant for all of her life. Ayla gasped, feeling her own energy increase tenfold and flow through her just like the Force did. Was the first thing that left Naruto's mouth as he gently opened all 361 of her Tenketsu points, allowing the chakra to continue its flow. Your chakra coils are average, but your pathways are solid and healthy. I think you will be able to manipulate and use chakra with no problem. She nodded, but found that she had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. Naruto seemed to catch on, for as he released his hold he looked into her eyes and smiled. Want me to explain? It would help, she relented. Okay, where to start? He thought about it for a moment, before taking a deep breath. Chakra is a form of energy which all living individuals naturally produce to some degree. It is a mixture of the physical energy present in every cell of the body and the spiritual energy gained from exercise and experience. Once mixed, it can be channeled through the chakra circulatory system, which is to chakra as the regular circulatory system is to blood, to any of the 361 chakra points, called tenketsu, in the body. With me so far? I think so, Ayla replied with a nod. It sounded an awful lot like the Force, but instead of it being an energy field which surrounded all life, it appeared to be a reservoir of energy from within oneself. Through various methods, the most common of which would be hand seals, the chakra in the body could be manipulated to create an effect which would not be possible otherwise, such as walking on water and… Wow, hold on a minute. Ayla said suddenly, gaining a frown from the blonde. Did you just say walking on water? Naruto looked at her for a moment, blinked once or twice, and then broke out in a wide grin. You guys don't know how to walk on water? Ayla stared at him incredulously for a moment, and then dumbly shook her head. Naruto's grin did the impossible when it widened further. I don't believe you. It's considered a basic chakra control exercise along with tree climbing. Ayla looked ever so slightly agitated. Well, excuse me if we can't perform miracles. The blonde raised his hands in surrender. Sorry, I forget where I am sometimes. Tell you what, I'll show you the exercises I'm talking about. If you want to control your chakra, you're going to have to learn these two techniques. Ayla sighed, rubbing her forehead with a hand before nodding. Naruto, still grinning like a fool, rose to his feet and walked across the clearing to one of the towering mushroom-shaped trees of the Felucian forest. He looked up at the long, branchless trunk and grumbled something before bringing his hands together in a hand seal, explaining to her in a clear voice as he went. For beginners, it's usually easier to concentrate your chakra through hand seals, so I'll show it to you. Ayla complied, her annoyance forgotten and replaced by curiosity. She stood up and walked beside her teacher, taking close note of the way his hands formed a strange seal. She felt a surge of energy at the soles of his feet, and watched with ever-rising curiosity as Naruto stepped forward, placed his right foot against the bark and began to walk. He walked vertically up the tree, without needing anything to hold him in place. She gaped in surprise. He was basically defying gravity. Sure, she could do it too, but in the form of force-augmented jumps and dives, not physically walking up vertical surfaces. Her surprise lengthened when he reached the mushroom-shaped chute and kept going, now standing upside down right above her. He looked down with a sheepish smile. With me so far? She nodded dumbly, and immediately berated herself at being so mystified with what Naruto had called a basic training exercise. His grin widened as he spoke. First, I will teach you the 12 basic hand seals needed to channel chakra into jutsu. Then when I'm sure you know them, I will teach you the basic ninjutsu and genjutsu that were taught at the academy back home. I considered teaching you taijutsu, but I'm guessing you already know an assortment of fighting styles. It took Ayla a while to catch on to what he was saying, but she was never the sort of person to shy away from asking a question. I'm sorry, what are ninjutsu, genjutsu and taijutsu? He blinked before offering her an apologetic smile. Sorry, I keep forgetting I'm not at home anymore. Taijutsu translates as the physical arts. It's basically martial arts and fighting styles. Genjutsu stands for illusionary techniques. That's the ability to create illusions on yourself or against your opponent. Finally, there's ninjutsu, my favorite, which creates all of the really cool techniques, including elemental and clone jutsu. Ayla nodded, absently feeling her neck muscles protest at her looking up for so long. Naruto chose that moment to release his technique, performing a flawless somersault as he fell and landing in a crouch right beside her. He sat down, and she mimicked his movements, listening intently to what he was saying. There are 12 basic hand seals to learn, but once you know them well enough, the sky's the limit. I will begin by teaching you these seals. His hands came together to make each seal as he introduced them, and she watched intently. The 12 seals are bird, boar, dog, dragon, ox, tiger, serpent, rat, horse, monkey, hare, and ram. Usually it takes an academy student months or even years to perfect these seals, but I'm confident I can have you commit them to muscle memory within 3 months. There's a chance we'll be found sooner. Ayla told him. They have air units here as well as ground. Air? Naruto asked with a frown, before he looked at her in complete confusion. You mean they can fly? Ayla raised a delicate eyebrow. How else do you think the Republic spans over 100,000 worlds? Don't forget you're talking to me, a guy whose people's idea of a technological marvel is the invention of the telephone. Naruto said dubiously, by the sage I'm way out of my depth here. Ayla smiled coyly, good thing you have me then. Naruto chuckled himself, yeah, a beautiful tour guide. A guy could do much worse. She blushed slightly at the compliment, but forced it down and berated herself for beginning to feel the way she did. It was a core rule of the Jedi Order that any kind of emotional attachment was forbidden. It was a central rule of the Order, to stop them from feeling negative emotions which came with feeling for someone. She realized that she had not uttered a word to him, and he was looking at her with a slightly nervous expression. Ayla, are you ready to start or what? Oh, she started, before shaking her head, yeah, let's begin. And begin they did. Naruto began slowly, spending 3 hours making her go through the basic 12 hand seals to the point where her hands and fingers hurt from the continuous movements. He spent the rest of the day going through the basics of ninjutsu. According to him there were 3 basic jutsu that all beginner shinobi needed to learn. Those 3 were the Bunshin no Jutsu, or clone technique, the Henge no Jutsu, or transformation, and the Kawarimi no Jutsu, or body replacement. The Bunshin was a more basic form of Naruto's signature technique, what he called the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, or shadow clone, and was a mostly genjutsu-oriented technique. It allowed the user to create an exact replica of the wielder, illusions which could be used to spring traps or impersonate opponents. Ayla quickly learned that these were not like the ones Naruto used. While his were solid copies, these were simply illusions, and if looked at closely enough one could distinguish them by the lack of any changes to the environment around them, like kicking up dust or crushing grass. The henge was simply a technique which could transform someone into either an object or in a more advanced form into the appearance of someone else. Another genjutsu-oriented jutsu designed mainly for stealth and spying. Ayla found this to be one of the most interesting of the 3, and considered that if the Jedi knew this technique then so many of their operatives within the Separatists would have been saved. Finally there was the Kawarimi, which was the most interesting of the 3 in that it allowed the user to change places with another nearby object, like a piece of debris, an animal, or even, to her surprise, another person. She was surprised, and slightly hesitant to believe that it was a type of time and space manipulation jutsu, capable of bending reality around someone to make the switch. Naruto had explained to her that there were other, more advanced forms of this technique, and that all were useful or deadly against opponents. That night they hunted, cooked and ate what they could, and during this first of many sessions she learned a great deal about the young man, his people, his culture, his civilization's hierarchy, and most important to her was that she learned more about him, as a person. He had a harsh life, both of his parents was killed by a creature called the Kyuubi when he was born, and he had lived most of his young life as an orphan, scrounging around and living as best he could. In return Ayla told him about herself, as well as everything about the order she was a part of. She told him about her time as an apprentice under Jedi Master Quinlan Vos, the places she had been to and the people she had met. Then she told him about the war, and how the Jedi had been changed from peacekeepers and mediators into soldiers and officers. Why were the Jedi forced to become soldiers? Naruto asked with a confused look. Didn't this republic have an army of its own? Ayla shook her head, the Galactic Republic hadn't needed one until now. We had been enjoying peace for over 1,000 years, and during that time the army was downsized again and again until there was nothing more than a small judiciary force. The individual member states were left to govern their own defense. Sure, small conflicts cropped up every now and then, but when that happened we were usually called to settle them. So when these separatists appeared with mass armies of these droids, there was no battle-hardened soldiers to meet them, and considering the Jedi were the only ones with combat experience they were asked to become commanding officers. Naruto surmised, taking a bite of his meat as he spoke. Is that about right? Ayla nodded her head, that's right. There was no time to gather and train a traditional army, so we were asked to lead a new army that the Republic had secretly been assembling, an army of clones. Hold on, Naruto cut in lightly, if the Republic knew this war was going to break out, why did they create a clone army? Why didn't they just assemble an army of volunteers to meet them? Training an army of the size needed was impossible. It would have taken far too long, and by the time such an army was ready the Separatists would have won. Ayla explained, the clones could be grown and made combat ready in a quarter of the time it would have taken us to train regular soldiers. Naruto nodded, absently finishing off his meat. 2 weeks later, CC-5052 or Clone Marshal Commander Bly stood at perfect attention as he watched the Theta-class shuttle slowly descend upon the makeshift landing pad. The ship's two large wings folded up around her as her stubby landing struts hit the metal with an audible thump, and almost immediately the landing ramp located in the rear opened with a hiss of hydraulics. Bly, flanked by two battle-hardened ARC troopers, watched with a mixture of horror and fascination as the Emperor's agent walked down the ramp. He was a tall and imposing figure, hooded and cloaked in maroon robes. As the man walked down the ramp of the shuttle, Bly could just make out the glint of dull gray armor and a black cylindrical hilt of a lightsaber latched to his belt. Flanking him were no less than 4 members of the Republic's elite Senate Guard, or Red Guard, dressed in their crimson robes and bullet-shaped helms, force pikes against their shoulders. His voice broke through the commander's reverie. "Report, Commander." Bly stood solidly to attention, snapping a salute as he reported on his progress. "We have confirmed the deaths of Jedi Knight Barriss Offee, as well as the 3 Padawans. However, we were unable to find the body of Jedi Knight Ayla Secura." The Inquisitor began walking across the pad, past Bly and his 2 ARC guards and down the main ramp to solid ground. The entirety of the 327th Star Corps had assembled just outside of Felucia's main settlement of Quetiao. Huge swaths of forest had been felled to make way for the army. The main fortress of former Commerce Guild President Shu Mai, nothing more than a burning ruin, smoke billowing into the skies just a couple of kilometers away. The separatist presence on the planet had been thoroughly purged. All 10,000 battle droids and their mechanized units had been destroyed down to the last scrap of metal. The newcomer walked through the ranks of men and machines as the marshal followed, continuing to give his report. "I have sent out a full brigade in search of her, as well as a squadron of LAATs to continue searching from the air. So far, Senior Commander Auden has reported no sign of her and is requesting additional units to help with the search. Order the Senior Commander to pull his brigade back here. You and your corps are being reassigned." Bly blinked, before frowning. "Sir, we haven't completed our mission here. Not just in our failure to completely carry out Order 66, but we haven't been able to nullify the contagion the Seps have placed in the water supply." "That is no longer your concern, Commander," the maroon-robed figure rebuked. "Your corps are to pack up and prepare for redeployment. You on the other hand will remain, along with the men on this list." Bly looked down at the datapad the Inquisitor held out to him, took it and began scanning through the list of names. The list of individuals included himself, and several individuals from the Star Corps ARC Trooper contingents. The best of the corps he saw, many of whom were trained by the general herself. The marshal looked up at the Inquisitor questioningly, and after a moment he spoke. "Begging your pardon, sir, but what is this about? You and the men on that list have been reassigned to the 501st Legion under the command of new Supreme Commander of Imperial Forces Lord Vader." This statement made Bly look at the names again. The 501st were considered the elite of the Grand Army, the best of the best. It was an honor to be reassigned to this force. "I will also require you to list a battalion's worth of your best clone troopers to remain here with me. Ones who are not on that list." The water was cool and crisp, cleansing her of all her aches and pains as she dived into the crystal-clear lagoon, sending splashes and ripples across the otherwise calm and still lake. It was a stroke of luck that they camped nearby one of only a few pools of water which was predator-free. Which just 2 weeks before she thought was impossible. A moment passed before Ayla exploded from the depths, taking a deep gulp of air before she fell back. She took a deep, cleansing breath, enjoying the feeling of the water bathing her naked form, caressing her skin in chilly tendrils, droplets running across her tender cerulean flesh in rivulets. She laid back and let herself float, arms and legs stretched, looking up at the Felucian sky. Her leather clothes lay on the shore, hung over a low-lying branch to dry after she had washed them. It would take an hour or 2 for them to dry under the Felucian sun, and she wanted to wash the dirt and grime from herself while she waited. Ayla didn't worry about being caught. Naruto was at least a kilometer away hunting for their next meal. The Felucian jungle was full of edible things including plants and animals, so there was no real worry about keeping themselves fed, and with his skills catching prey was as simple as breathing, but it would take him an hour or 2 at least to find what they needed. She owed Naruto so much, and she doubted she could ever repay him. The blonde-haired shinobi had saved her life at least 3 times, and had taken care of her when she was hurt and vulnerable, nursing her back to health when if she was alone she would have surely perished. More still, he had willingly shared the basic knowledge of his people with her, someone he had just met, and she was thankful to him in his efforts to teach her. She never knew she had her own personal reservoir of power, something she could now call upon and manipulate at will. He had taught her the 12 basic seals that aided in the drawing of this power with great care and an abundance of patience. He was a great teacher, despite him thinking otherwise, and her progress had only solidified that. He had taught her the 3 basic jutsu, as well as showing her the 2 basic exercises to harness and control her chakra. Alya had already mastered the tree climbing exercise, and was well on her way to walking on water. She giggled at the memory of slowly walking across the water in the same manner one would walk a tightrope. Naruto was nearby, sitting at the edge of the lake and offering her pointers when she needed it. She had fallen into that accursed stream more times than she could count, and she was still falling. She was determined, if for no other reason than that the silly oaf had dangled the promise of learning stronger techniques if she proved she could do it. Alya sighed, realizing she had more fun training with him than she had in a long time. The war seemed to have sucked all of the joy from her life, replacing it with a need to keep her and her troopers alive. How she missed the days when she was a simple apprentice, training with her master and learning new and exciting things every day. She missed those days. She missed Master Voss, Master Tholm, Trasa and Yoda, whose old sagely voice was better than a glass of warm bantha milk to a child. She missed the younglings at the temple who she played with when she wasn't stuck on a far-off world fighting for her life. Their happy faces and playful laughter assaulted her ears, and she felt a pain in her chest. She would never hear those voices again. Images of Barris vanishing in a ball of fire invaded her mind, of the 3 Padawans lying dead in that communications room, of Gale holding a blaster to her forehead. Alya felt a tear trace its way down her cheek before she dunked her head under the water's surface. Naruto took a deep breath as he walked towards the small lagoon, absently taking off his jacket and shirt as he walked. The hunt had been fairly simple this time around. Barely a half hour in and he had managed to catch and kill one of the strange reptilian birds that were common on this world. He already had it over a fire when he left, leaving a cage bunchen to watch over it and make sure it didn't get burned. The blonde had not bathed in almost 3 days, and even he was beginning to notice the stench rising from his clothes. He needed to wash them, and then wash all the grime off of himself in order to keep his sanity intact. Naruto didn't know where his comrade was, and hoped that Alya hadn't gotten the same idea as he had. Thinking of Alya brought many emotions and unanswered questions to the blonde. After living with her for 2 weeks he thought he was getting to know her quite well, and what he had surmised was that she was a strong and courageous woman, if a little impulsive at times, jumping headfirst into a situation instead of standing back. She kind of reminded him of himself when he was a teenager, only more refined, more calm and in control and not the tornado of barely controlled energy he once was. She also possessed a healthy dose of curiosity, listening to every word as he trained her in the basics of a shinobi's abilities. Alya had proven to be a fast learner, willing to train for hours or even days on end to master a certain technique. He remembered after he showed her the basic hand signs and handed her a scroll on the subject she spent another 3 hours reading through the parchment and going through the hand seals. He reached the last line of trees, and stopped dead in his tracks at what he saw. Alya walked through the shallows towards the beach, completely naked to the world. Quickly the blonde jumped back and hid behind a tree, quietly berating himself. Of course she would want to take a bath. She hadn't bathed in a while either. He knew he should have just turned his back on the scene, gone back to camp and watch over the food. But that stupid perverted impulse of his kept him rooted firmly in place, and made him turn around and survey the form of perfection before him. Her body consisted of a supple form and flat stomach, pure unblemished cerulean skin which sparkled thanks to the droplets of water clinging to her flesh. Her s were a little over a handful and her legs were long and seemed to stretch for an eternity with every fluid step she took. Those 2 long head tails followed her, swishing backwards and forwards, touching her firm backside on more than one occasion. In fact, every inch of flesh on her body was firm and toned, showing that she took her physical health very, very seriously. By God, she was a sight to behold. Naruto suddenly gave his head a violent shake, before considering smashing it against a tree trunk. He loved that old sage like a father, but damned Jiraiya to hell for turning him into a pervert. He turned, took a deep, calming breath and marched back to camp, unaware that as Ayla reached her now dry clothes her head shot up and darted from left to right, almost like she was looking for something. She reappeared 5 minutes later, fully dressed and drying off her long leku with a towel. Naruto sat rigidly in place, shadow clone dispelled and watching the meet as it darkened. She took several steps closer, eyes closed and features relaxed. I really needed that. Naruto looked up to her, trying desperately to stop the full blush from forming on his cheeks. He apparently failed miserably. Naruto, are you alright? Ayla asked with a little worry, kneeling beside him and placing a delicate cerulean hand against his forehead. Do you have a fever? Your face is all flushed. Nope, Naruto replied, taking those images and violently flushing them from his thought processes. Just a little tired is all, and I'm in real need of a bath. She smiled a delicate, beautiful smile. Well, I'm finished bathing, so you can go if you want. I'll keep an eye on the food. Naruto nodded and stood up, trying and failing to not notice the cleavage showing thanks to her leather cut-off top. Thanks. Ayla stared after him as he disappeared into the forest, a little confused from the change of his aura. When he saw her walk into camp she felt that he was embarrassed and a little guilty. Why would he need to feel guilty? After a moment the young knight shrugged, and finished drying off her leku. Major Garn looked up as the last wedge-shaped Acclamator-class assault ship disappeared in the surrounding cloud cover over the capital, the 750-meter-long warship transporting 16,000 of his brethren to their next assignment. He had heard that although the separatist leadership was destroyed there were still worlds refusing to adhere to the new empire's control, and almost half of the Grand Army was being rerouted to deal with them. 6 months, the lieutenant considered the last Confederate resistance would fall within 6 months. That was not his concern however, not anymore. His attention was once again fully on this Inquisitor, an agent of the Empire's new Inquisitorius, who he considered was a replacement for the Jedi. The Inquisitor here was definitely a Force-sensitive individual, but immediately he decided he didn't like him. Something about this man made his hair stand on end, not like Lady Sakura or Lady Afi, who had a calming aura about them. He didn't even know the man's name. Garn had been handpicked by his former martial commander to lead the chosen clone squads during his operation. The major found himself in charge of over 500 veteran clone troopers, a battalion's worth task force gathered to help in the hunt for their former general. Several meters away was the intimidating form of a small column of modified at-RT artillery walkers, given to them to serve as mobile command centers. A further 6 Lot gunships lay nestled to his left, already filling up with a platoon of 30 clones each. Are you listening, Major? Yes, Inquisitor, Garn replied, looking over the holographic view of the jungle for at least 50 kilometers in every direction. This section of jungle stretches for at least 300 kilometers in every direction, and with her abilities Knight Sakura could be well out of range by now. There is no need to worry about that, Lieutenant, the Inquisitor replied. If she was injured she would not be able to run far. She would be looking for an open space with a water source and enough cover to hide. The Major thought about it. There were only a select few locations which had water supplies as it was the middle of the dry season. From atmospheric scans he knew that there were only 3 small pools of water in this section of jungle, and a stream which was continually shrinking as the weeks passed. Then I will order the gunships to survey these 3 areas for any sign of her. See to it that it is done, Major. The Inquisitor replied, turning to make his way towards the open ramp of the at-RT. Her survival is a black mark on the 327th Star Corps. Makes you look like you cannot complete your assignments. The lieutenant grit his teeth at the man's statements. Yes, he was beginning to miss the Jedi already. If he could he would rather kill this man instead of his former general. Garn had deep respect for her, as a warrior and a person. He would fulfill his duty, but he didn't have to like it. That's it, Naruto said with a smile as he watched her. I think you got it. Ayla breathed a sigh of relief as she put one foot in front of the other, still amazed every time she looked down to see the crystal clear water lapping at her bare feet. She was soaking wet from several failed attempts, her skin glistening in the mid-morning sunlight, but she did it, she was walking on water. A genuinely happy smile curved her lips upward as the young woman looked down at the mass of life beneath her feet. She clasped her hands behind her back and leaned down to look at the small shoal of alien fish flitting through the deep water of the pool. At that moment she felt different, happy and relaxed. Ayla looked up to see Naruto standing before her, a smile of his own adorning his whiskered cheeks. "There you go Ayla, knew you could do it." She blushed ever so slightly at the compliment, before offering him a quick bow, hoping the sudden movement hid the darkening of her cheeks. Sadly this did not go unnoticed by the blonde human. "Hey, are you blushing?" "No," she replied with as much indignation as she could muster, which wasn't much considering her happy mood. "You are blushing," he exclaimed with a chuckle. Ayla's blush darkened, before she felt her control slip and she fell back into the water with a squeak of surprise. Naruto moved quickly, grabbing her by the sides before she went under and pulling her back up to a standing position. Sorry. Concentrate on the soles of your feet. Good, gather your chakra." Ayla regained her footing, and sent a dangerous look to her teacher. "That was not funny." "I disagree," Naruto replied with a grin, turning around to walk back to dry land. He managed 3 steps before Ayla jumped him, sending the two of them cascading through the lake's surface. A second passed before the young Twi'lek exploded from the water, concentrating her chakra into the soles of her feet to keep herself stably on the surface. She was soaked to the bone again, but surprising her teacher had been worth it. Or so she thought. She waited for a minute before she began to get worried. Naruto hadn't resurfaced, and as she walked in a circle, absently calling out his name, and getting no reply, she really started to worry. Ayla was completely unaware of the dark shape keeping stride with her from beneath her feet, not until a pair of hands exploded from the water and latched onto her bare ankles. The young knight was barely able to squeak in surprise before she was pulled down, losing control of her chakra. Both resurfaced at the same time, only their heads visible. Naruto shook his head violently, tossing a mass of droplets from his hair in every direction, including on his bemused student. Ayla frowned at him, before a rueful smile curved her dark lips, a smile which the blonde returned. Both concentrated their chakra into the palms of their hands and the soles of their feet, forcing themselves out of the water and into a kneeling stance. Both looked at each other for a heartbeat, before the young woman playfully stuck out her tongue. "Catch me if you can." With that she performed a perfect backward somersault, her body diving into the water, kicking up splashes which drenched Naruto once again. The blonde shook himself, looked at the disturbed water's surface, and grinned. "What do you think I can't swim?" He took a few careful hops before jumping into the air in a chakra-propelled leap, and streamlining his body dived into the water, following his student through the clear lake. Both flew through the water as if being in such a place was as natural as breathing. Ayla continuing to lead Naruto on, performing beautiful and tantalizing acrobatics to keep herself just out of her teacher's reach. She hadn't had so much fun in years. Both were completely unaware that a single clone trooper was watching them from the far side of the lake, looking through the scope of his sniper rifle. He had a perfect shot at Ayla's head, but didn't take it. Instead he began discreetly sending a communique to his superiors. "We may have won this war, but what about the next one?" These were the words that new Galactic Emperor Dantius Palpatine asked of us. "In order to protect our just empire we will need the continued presence of the Army and Navy. Because of this I will be adding extra funding to the military defense budget. It has been confirmed that the funding for military defense will be quadrupled by the end of the year. It has also been confirmed that the clone legions will slowly be phased out, replaced by regular volunteer soldiers from across the galaxy. There has been some worrying news that non-humans will not be allowed to volunteer." This reporter asked the Imperial spokesman Masa Maida to verify the claim. Rest assured the ban on non-human sentients from entering the armed forces is not permanent, and is simply a precaution which will be lifted once the separatist threat is behind us. Depths of Jedi corruption revealed. For the first time since the Jedi Rebellion, new light has been shed on the devious methods employed by the Jedi Order, once proud warriors of peace and justice, twisted by their High Council into murderers and traitors. Thorough reports compiled and released to the press by Imperial advisor Sat Pestage today show the depths of the Jedi Order's corruption. The charges are varied and each more devious than the last, from the murder of innocents to the attempted assassination of our leadership, from poisoning water supplies to joining the separatists themselves. Click on Jedi. From peacekeepers to traitors to see the full story of the Jedi Order's fall from grace. The night was fairly quiet, which in itself was strange. Usually in the Felucian jungle the night would be just as lively as the day. Calls of the numerous animals would echo through the darkness as nocturnal herbivores and hunters alike came out to begin their own day. It was nearing daybreak, the sun just dipping over the horizon. The camp was quiet, packed up and placed under the protection of the camouflage nets. So when CC 9023, codenamed Clay, silently arrived at the edge of the tree line in a crouch, he knew full well that this was the place they had spent the last few weeks looking for. The general had been very hard to track, but now it was all over. He looked around, raising his hand in the shape of a fist. Within a second his full squad of clone troopers were by his side, forming a battle line across the trees. All were ready, blasters held purposefully in their hands as they waited for the veteran sergeant's order. Clay lowered his hand, and as one the 12 troopers rushed through the campsite with the speed of vipers and the silence of predators. Their two targets, the general and the man who saved her, were holed up in a hollowed-out tree at the other side of the clearing. The clones surrounded it expertly, leaving no chance for escape. Clay looked around, and nodded to the 3 clones by the entrance. They in turn nodded, taking a step back, leveling out their blaster rifles and firing a concentrated salvo of blaster bolts into the tree, shredding bark and peppering whatever lay within. The barrage lasted for a full 5 seconds, and when it stopped the rifles were smoking from their discharges. Clay walked forward, patting one on the shoulder, and opened the net. He looked down to see the bodies of the blonde human, and their former general, her once unblemished cerulean skin peppered with the black marks of blaster fire. He walked in, checked the pulse of the human, then that of his general. Both were dead. The sergeant took the time to close the young Jedi's dark eyes before turning to his troopers. Send the report to the Inquisitor that we have successfully tracked down and eliminated General Alya Secura and an unknown human male. He said, not wanting to face that man at the moment. He waited for a couple of heartbeats before the assigned clone responded. He wishes to view the body, sir. Of course he does, the sergeant grit out. Well, what are you waiting for? Pick her up. 2 clones entered the trunk, both carefully picking up the dead body of their general with great care, like she was asleep and they were moving her to her bed. The sergeant sighed, hoping that they granted her a quick death. He looked at the male who tried to save her life, and bent over, closing his azure orbs. You did well, son, but not good enough. The mood in the camp was somber as Squad 9 brought the dead body of their former general to the center of the clearing. Clone troopers stopped what work they were doing to survey the body as it was carried in, carefully, by 2 clones and surrounded by the rest of the squad. They walked to the center and set her down, allowing the Inquisitor a look. The man walked towards the body, Major Garn and his 4 red guards in tow. The major stopped a good several meters away, not willing to see his general in such a state. The Inquisitor and his guardsmen had no such reservations, continuing until they stood right over her. The man looked down at her stoically, steel-capped boot giving her a nudge to make sure she was truly dead. Excellent work, Sergeant, the Inquisitor stated as he looked over the body. You and your men will receive a recommendation for your efforts. Thank you, sir, the sergeant replied half-heartedly. So much for the unbeatable Jedi Knight Alya Secura. The Inquisitor spat her name as if it were a vile poison, kicking her limp arm away, only mortal. The body exploded into a puff of white smoke, blinding all who looked at it for a brief moment. When it cleared, the general's body wasn't there, but a lump of bark instead. The Inquisitor looked at the body in complete surprise. Then he heard a steady beep and looked to what was tied to the wood with widening eyes. The thermal detonator exploded, turning the timber itself into shrapnel. The Inquisitor and his 4 guards were caught in the blast. The particle field released from the thermal nuclear fusion incinerating them to atoms before they could scream. The blast field stopped at 5 meters and collapsed in on itself, leaving nothing but a crater. Garn looked at the empty space in complete surprise. Force me. Alya looked at the field in complete shock. Sure, she knew the Kawarimi no Jutsu was useful to get one out of a tight situation, but she was unaware that one could basically turn a last-second escape into such a counterattack. The Inquisitor and his entourage didn't know what hit them until it was too late. Shinobi Lesson 101. She looked over at her on-again off-again sensei, who was watching the scene with a smirk. He was slouched beside her, body leaning against the trunk of the tree, a cigarette in his mouth. Naruto's handbook, Chapter 5, pages 50 to 69, The Many Uses of the Substitution Jutsu. You have a book? Several, Naruto replied, taking a drag of his cigarette before putting it out against the bark. In fact, I'm thinking of taking up writing again. Perhaps there's a market for Icha in the greater galaxy. Ayla just stared at him, finding something not quite right about his sheepish grin. She had known Naruto for the better part of a month, meaning that she now had a basic understanding of his quirks and habits. She considered him a friend, as well as a mentor. Now then, he said as he rose to his feet, dusting himself off. I think it's time we got as far away from here as possible, don't you? Yes, she agreed as she rose from her crouch. The clones will continue the search even without the Inquisitor to look over their shoulders. If we can hide out here in the forest, how long would they look for you? They are dedicated and unwilling to leave a job unfinished. They will hunt me until ordered otherwise, she replied. Naruto looked over at her, noticing the sadness and depression he had seen after their betrayal begin to resurface. Okay, our options are to run until we get caught, or fight until we get overwhelmed. Naruto muttered before releasing a whispered curse, not very good options. There is a third option. What? Ayla looked him in the eyes and managed a weak smile. We could get off the planet. If she had made this remark a month ago, Naruto would have questioned her sanity, but now with all that he heard from her, he was willing to go on a little faith. He scratched the back of his head with a sigh, before nodding in agreement. Okay, where do we go? The only spaceport on Felucia is in the capital, Quaitiao. Ayla explained with a thoughtful frown. They were shipping refugees off the planet when we landed, still were last time I checked. That was a few weeks ago, and the battle with the separatists is probably over by now. Naruto pointed out. I'll be guessing there will still be refugees wanting to get off-world. Ayla countered, the water supply was poisoned by the SEP leader before she left. That was the main reason why we remained on the planet, to stop them. It's worth a try, but there will be a problem in getting there. We'll have to make it through this jungle, dodge an army of enemy soldiers and smuggle ourselves onto a ship at a heavily guarded spaceport. He suddenly grinned. That's what the Henge no Jutsu was made for. Felucia's capital city, Quaitiao, was not what one would call a city in the literal sense. It was the largest settlement on Felucia, but was for all intents and purposes a simple port town. The town was an assortment of hovels, dwellings and other buildings ranging from a story to 2 stories tall, with large landing pads for ships scattered across the landscape. The settlement was encircled by a 5-meter-high wall of stone and the protective bubble of a deflector shield to protect it from the planet's deadly wildlife. The local population was roughly 12,000, including a variety of peoples from across the galaxy, not just humans but Ayla's own species, Twi'leks, and large hammer-headed creatures which his guide called Ithorians. To Naruto, who would be considered a country boy, this was a surreal and incredible experience. The settlement was full of refugees from all over the planet. They lined the streets and took up space in every inn and hostel. Literally everywhere was booked solid. A simple settlement of 12,000 now sported close to 5 times that number. As the 2 unlikely comrades walked down the streets, their features covered by worn brown robes, Naruto's head darted left and right, taking in everything around him. The aromas of unknown concoctions was thick in the air from mobile kitchens set up to keep the refugees fed, from inns and taverns and the few street stalls which remained open even in a time of crisis. Naruto had no need to wear any kind of disguise except for his brown robes. No one but Ayla would know his face. His Twi'lek guide on the other hand was another matter entirely. She was a well-known Jedi Knight who had fought and won dozens of major battles. The very second they had entered the town, he noticed wanted posters with her face strewn across walls and billboards. So he had her cast a henge on herself, and was impressed by what she had come up with. Her cerulean skin had changed color to a deep red, with black tattoos etched into her leku and down her arms. He almost didn't recognize her. She was a picture of serenity and calm as they walked down the crowded streets, their drab brown cloaks making them just another 2 refugees in a massive throng of refugees. You're going to need a new name if we're going to get off this planet in one piece. Naruto whispered to her. I've already thought of one. Ayla whispered back, Jazarar. You've never used it before? I have, but only a few Jedi I trust know the name, so I'll be fine. Naruto nodded and continued to look around as they walked down the crowded streets. He saw the odd duo or trio of white armored clone troopers here and there, but other than that the army that was here a few weeks before seemed to have moved on. His hand moved instinctively to his kunai pouch when they got close, but they rarely gave them a brief glance. It seemed that Ayla's henge was working just fine. So how are we going to get off this rock? Naruto asked as Ayla stepped into a bar, walked through the crowded main room and took an empty table near the back. I don't know about you, but I doubt we'll be getting out of here anytime soon. It's true that the public transports will be full, but there is another way, his Twi'lek guide answered. Ordering a drink whose name Naruto didn't recognize, he ordered the same. We find a privateer, a smuggler or something and volunteer to temporarily join his crew. I'm guessing you need a skill to join a starship crew, Naruto pointed out, and I'm sorry to say that I won't be much use with working on it. You won't have to, Ayla replied, accepting her drink, a strange blue liquid, and took a graceful sip. I know my way around mechanics and engines. You can be a bodyguard or a mercenary for hire. I've seen your skills. Even without using jutsu you're a formidable hand-to-hand fighter, and I've already taught you the basics of handling a blaster. The blonde looked down at the duo of blaster pistols, holstered in a black belt at his waist, and frowned. He had relieved them of one of the ARC lieutenants he had slain and damned near almost blown his own head off if Ayla wasn't there to grab them off him. It turned out that after a couple of days of target practice he was a natural gunfighter, and there were plenty of ammo cartridges scattered around the forest from the entrenched battles fought between the Republic and the Separatists. Even so, I'm going to need more than a gun hand to serve my weight on a starship, he replied, taking a gulp of the blue liquid. It actually wasn't bad. So you teach me the basics? Ayla laughed lightly. I was going to whether you wanted to or not. Very well, Naruto smirked. I am at your command, Jasa-sensei. Sensei? Means teacher in my people's language, Naruto explained with a simple wave of his hand. So where are we going to go to join one of these smuggling crews? Right here, this place is a center for smuggler and privateer captains. They recruit in bars? Their work is technically illegal, you know. Can't just rush out into the street and scream that they're recruiting. His guide pointed out as she took another sip of her drink. Good point. Naruto conceded, taking a nice long gulp of the blue liquid. This is nice. Enjoy. So, Mrs. Rar, you wish to join my crew, do you? The man's name was Jaden Korra, and he was old and grizzled, a head of grimy white hair pulled back by a stained olive cap. He sat in one of the back booths of the small bar, wearing a stained dark green vest, matching pants and black boots. A blaster was holstered to his hip and a cigar was clutched between his teeth. Yes sir, Ayla replied respectfully, remaining calm and polite to the seasoned smuggler captain. Korra leaned forward, studying Ayla's form for a moment. And besides your ample form, what else can you bring to my crew? I've gained quite a few desperate men saying they can repair anything and end up not knowing what a hydrospanner is. Understandable, there is a war going on and people want to get away from it, Ayla replied, also leaning forward until the two were face to face. And I'm not just a pretty face captain. I know my way around an engine room, was a mechanic on a smuggler vessel a few years ago. Former smugglers are you? Jaden replied, looking her with a new light. And what about your friend over there, what can he offer me? Naruto finished his drink and looked the man in the eye. Ayla spoke up for him. He's not a mechanic, but he's a fighter and a good one. I have enough fighters on my ship. Not like him you haven't. Ayla replied, taking a sip of her ale before continuing. Naruto here is a master of hand-to-hand combat. He also knows his way around a blaster. He was trained by the shinobi tribes of Konoha. Never heard of them, he growled. Suppose you haven't, considering the planet is fairly close to the unknown regions. Ayla replied nonchalantly. Even Naruto couldn't tell if she was lying, and she put the whole thing past him first. But they are some of the best. They claim to be able to take on anyone, Jedi, Sith, Mandalorians, anyone. Is that a fact? The old man leaned back thoughtfully in his chair, looking to the man beside him. He was considerably younger, and Naruto guessed he was hired muscle by the double-barreled blaster on his belt. I tell you what, little missy, I've been having me some engine trouble, got caught up in that battle in orbit, fried my hyperdrive and sublight pretty good. You fix it for me and you're in my crew until we reach our destination. How's that sound? Perfect. What about my friend? He's also going to have to prove himself. Jaden looked at Naruto, then down at the dual blasters holstered to his utility belt. Can you shoot, son? When the occasion calls for it, Naruto replied. Then follow me, I have a small test for you. They followed him and his guard to the back of the bar, and through a worn door. Beyond was a backyard, completely empty sans for a few tables and chairs. Jaden and his two associates downed the last of their bottles, and taking each of them the old captain walked towards the table at the far end, placing them in a line. These bottles are a good 20 meters away from you, kid. If you can shoot them all in 3 shots, then I'll take you to the same destination as your little pretty friend. If not, then we leave you here. Hold on a second, Alya began, ready to protest, only to be stopped by Naruto's raised hand. The blonde grinned as he spoke. You're on, old man. Jaden nodded, before walking back to his two comrades. Naruto took a deep breath before placing himself in a ready position, fingers flexing as they neared the blaster holstered to his right hip. Alya looked on worriedly. Naruto didn't know how to shoot a blaster. She had to confiscate them after he pointed the barrel at his face. He had done a couple of hours practice under her supervision, but that didn't make him an expert marksman. In a blur he drew the blaster on his right hip, leveled it out and squeezed the trigger. 3 bolts of azure energy went flying one after the other, forcing his military-grade weapon to recoil. All 3 hit the mark, shattering the 3 ale bottles with pinpoint accuracy. Naruto smirked, before spinning the blaster in his hand and holstering it in a smooth motion. He turned, and bowed extravagantly before the 3 smugglers and his gobsmacked friend. Jaden whistled, not bad sonny, can I offer you a job? Naruto grinned, sorry old man, but I go where she goes. The old man took a drag from his cigar, if you ever change your mind. Now let's see if the little missy here is worth her salt, come on. The 3 smugglers turned and walked back into the bar, followed by Naruto and Alya a few steps behind. When did you learn to shoot like that? He smiled at her expression, practice, lots and lots of practice. But I confiscated them from you after each practice session. Keep telling yourself that. You didn't sneak in and take them out at night, no, you couldn't have. I would have known, sure you would have, he replied a little teasingly. Whatever makes you sleep better at night. You did steal them, she fumed, getting a little annoyed with his blasé attitude. He looked at her a little too intently, making her lean back. What? Naruto grinned mischievously, you're so cute when you're flustered. Her cheeks darkened, I am not flustered. Keep telling yourself that. Naruto. His first lesson in mechanical repair was when they were led into Jaden's ship. It was a massive thing, at least to his eyes. It was the first starship Naruto had ever seen, and although Alya had told him all about them, just seeing one for the first time was a surreal experience. It seemed to hit home the fact that he wasn't, well, home, anymore. The starship was maybe around a few dozen meters in length, disc-shaped with the cockpit located on one side of the ship. Jaden called it an YT-1300 freighter, and its name was the Last Call. Jaden led them up the ramp, through a corridor and into a small chamber he guessed was a sitting room of some description. It wasn't in the best shape, but the built-in sofas were in fairly good condition. They were introduced to the rest of the crew as they were led through. A young man, probably in his teens, named Jarvis Quinn. The guns for hire Jaden had with him in the bar were Solon Farr and Ken Lynx, and the pilot was a rather young woman of an alien species he would later know as named Donnie Relisa. Jaden stood in the center of the room, bent over and with an iron pike of some kind forced open a large metal grate. Engines down there, little missy, have a look at it and tell me what you think. Alya nodded her head before turning to him, wanna give me a hand? He gave her a look, isn't this a little too important for you to be teaching me? She shrugged in response, better sooner than later. Naruto sighed, but nodded and watched as she climbed through the hatch into the engineering room. He followed her, and fell into a mass of mangled wires and sparking machinery. Shit, hey Jaza, where are you? Down here, Alya's voice filtered through the sea of cables. He saw her form in the low light, glaring up at the captain. This is the worst kept engine I've ever seen in my life. I told you it was blasted good, didn't I? Jaden replied. Anyway, have a look at it and tell me if it can be repaired. The tools are besides the opening. Alya huffed, Naruto, get up there and hand me down the tools. Yes, ma'am. Alya slaved away on the repairs for a full 3 hours, calling out to him for certain tools and telling him about the basics of a starship's engine system as they went along. Eventually she began to swear, the words becoming more and more vulgar as she got a better view of the freighter's condition. She resurfaced a few moments later and called for the captain. He was there within a few seconds. "What's the word, sweetie? I was able to replace most of the wiring, and get your droid's brain up and running again. But the hyperdrive motivator and a few of the nodes are shot. You're going to need replacements if you're going to get off this planet," she explained, rubbing her oily hands with a rag. The captain looked at the members of his crew as they came, and a smile fell across all their faces. "Little lady, you're hired." "What?" "This was a test to make sure you knew your way around a hyperdrive engine. We have all the parts but no one to do the repairs. How long will it take to get her up and running?" "About a day," Ayla replied with a frown. "With Naruto's help I'd say half a day." "Alright, I'll get the spare parts out of storage." "So this is a hyperdrive motivator thingy?" Naruto asked with a frown as he examined the small device, a cube about the size of his hand. "Yep, that's it. It's the main component of any hyperdrive. It connects to the vessel's main computer systems to monitor and collect sensor and navigation data in order to determine how a ship jumps. Without it, it's impossible to travel to other worlds." Ayla explained as she continued to unscrew bolts with her hydro wrench. She had undone her transformation jutsu to store chakra. Her body was covered with black oil smudges and sweat. Naruto lay beside her, watching her work. He had learned so much from her over the last few weeks, and he felt like he owed her so much. "Could you hold this thing up while I unscrew this last bolt?" she asked. "Sure thing," he replied, reaching up with his hands to anchor the steel panel as she continued to work. The panel fell into his hands and he placed it to the side as she took the motivator from him and set to replace it. She tore out the destroyed original, handed it to him and began installing its replacement. "Throw that into the box, will you?" "Okay," Naruto replied as he took the old motivator from her. "How far along are we?" "Almost finished, just need to install this and the ship will be ready to go." Ayla continued to work, installing her replacement motivator in under a few minutes before taking the steel panel from him to bolt it back into place. "Hold this up, will you?" He complied, and held it in place with his arms while Ayla continued to screw the bolts back into place. She was almost finished, just 2 more and they would be ready to depart. She reached over, placing her weight on Naruto as she began to screw in the final few bolts. A hand fell on hers as she moved to seal the final one and she looked over to see Naruto stare at her in surprise. The hand felt so right against hers, so warm and comforting, but he found his error quickly and moved aside. "Sorry Ayla, didn't mean to get in your way." "It's okay," she replied, moving to screw in the final bolt. She ignored the pounding of her heart, and tried to ignore her cheeks as they took on a darker shade of blue with his contact. She couldn't have feelings for him, could she? No, impossible. She was a Jedi of the Order first and foremost, and she would continue to be. She finished screwing in the final bolt and handed the wrench to her friend, before crawling her way towards the exit. "Right, that should about do it, come on." Ayla." "What?" "Henge. Cleared the planet's atmosphere, sir." Release's silky voice could just be heard over the low roar of the old freighter's atmospheric thrusters. Switching from thrusters to sublight, now. Silence reigned as the atmospheric thrusters died away, replaced by a louder growl as the more powerful sublight engine sputtered to life. The blonde felt a pressure push him into the back of his chair as the engines came online, throwing the small ship from the planet's upper orbit into open space. This was Naruto's first time in a starship, obviously, and with everything Ayla had told him he thought he was prepared for it. He couldn't have been more wrong. Just seeing the ground disappear from your vision, watching as the ship passed by the thin clouds, and finally watching as the clear yellowish sky of Felucia was replaced by an eternal starry expanse. It was perhaps the most beautiful and terrifying thing Naruto had ever seen in his life. He tried to rein in his emotions so as not to worry his friend, strapped into the rear cockpit chair beside him. But she wasn't called an empath for nothing. A slender hand covered his own, offering him support and comfort. Naruto looked at her with a thankful expression before looking back out the cockpit viewscreen at the expanse of stars. "Sublight engines nominal, dash shows all green." Danny's voice broke through his awe, and he looked over to see a smile on her face. Korra, strapped into the pilot's chair, looked over at him and Ayla with a grin. "Well, Mrs. Rar, looks like you are worth your weight in salt after all." "Please, Captain," she said with a smile. "Just call me Jayza." "Well, Jayza, I promised both you and your friend safe passage to our destination, and I intend to deliver." Consider yourselves honored guests. Thank you, Captain. You're very welcome, little lady, the captain replied as he unstrapped himself from his bucket seat, nodding to Donnie, who began typing in coordinates on the console. So what's your first port of call? Esseles, was his reply. Right in the middle of the core worlds. It should be a fairly safe place, what with the war ending and all. She awoke with a start, sweating to the point where her night clothes were covered in it. Her breath left her in short gasps, chest heaving as she tried to regain her composure. Ayla reached up with a slender hand to wipe the sweat from her brow and brought both hands up to cover the sides of her head as she tried with all her might to dispel the afterimages of her nightmares. She found herself in the dank sleeping chamber given to her and Naruto by the ship's captain. The blonde was asleep on the decking, giving her the bed while he slept on the floor with a blanket. She had suffered from them on and off since the massacre began. The first one she was aware of was watching her former Jedi master and close friend die, so vivid she could have sworn she was actually there. The next one was watching Barris' death through her friend's own eyes, feeling her skin boil and burn as the coarse fire of a turbolaser blast cut her down in an explosion of crimson. She watched as her friend's master died on the Wookiee homeworld of Kashyyyk, shot in the back by the very clones she was healing. But this one was the very worst she had suffered from. It was so horrific, so traumatic that she couldn't describe it in words. She had seen the massacre at the Jedi Temple, through the eyes of a youngling hiding in the Jedi Council chambers. He felt her fear through the Force, and it broke her heart to feel it. No one so young should have to go through that fear, and her death was one neither she nor Ayla ever expected. She reached over to the youngling beside her, barely 4 or 5 with pale skin, blonde hair and big blue eyes, and gripped his arm with a shaking fist. Blaster fire and explosions could be heard outside the council chambers, getting closer and closer with each passing second. Soars, I'm scared. He looked to her, eyes wide with fear, yet still was able to place a comforting smile her way. Don't worry, Shia, they won't let them near us. But there's so many of them, she replied in a fearful whisper. Remember the stories. A Jedi Knight is worth 100 foes. He replied with a smile. Besides the severity of the situation, she frowned at him. You fell asleep halfway through the lesson again, didn't you? Mistress Nu told us that story to make sure we wouldn't become arrogant? Another Padawan, this one a little Bothan whose fur had just begun to grow, offered helpfully. That's it, she replied. She said that Jedi of the era believed they couldn't die, and ran to their own deaths. Before Source could reply, the great doors to the Jedi Temple opened with a creak, light spilled into the darkened council chambers. The younglings all looked up to see a single figure stride into the chamber. He was hooded and cloaked, garbed in simple Jedi garb, brown tunic and trousers, knee-high black boots and an opened hooded robe of brown. The darkness made it difficult for most to see, but the boy, Source, seemed to know him, for his eyes lit up with hope and his mouth curled into a toothy grin. See, it's going to be all right. It's Master Skywalker. Master Skywalker is here. Shia looked at Anakin, then turned to Source to see him get up and rush to his side. There was something not right about him. The Anakin Skywalker she remembered was kind and playful, playing Force tag and other games with them when he had free time. This Anakin felt wrong. Eyes were enshrouded by the darkness of his cloak, not looking at them. Something's not right, she whispered, shying further into the shadows of Master T's chair. Master Skywalker, there are too many of them. What are we going to do? There was such hope in Soar's eyes, in his voice. His idol was here to save them. Master Skywalker didn't respond, didn't speak. He unclipped his lightsaber from his belt and thumbed the switch. Azure blade coming to life with the weapon's signature snap hiss. Shia watched the blade with a horrified fascination as he moved with blurring quickness, killing Soars with a diagonal strike from his left shoulder to his right side. No, the younglings screamed, some began to huddle together. Others like Shia shied further into the shadows of their hiding place in a vain attempt to hide. Anakin wasn't fooled, he calmly and precisely strolled through the chamber, cutting down the younglings with quick and precise strokes. Ayla watched the whole thing, screaming at him to stop. Shia was the last, huddled against a corner with her knees curled up to her chest and her eyes staring widely at their supposed savior. Anakin walked up to her, looking down at her with eyes which were not his own. Instead of his usual lively blue orbs, his eyes were a sickly yellow, dark and vicious with sickle pupils befitting a predator. Ayla continued to cry at him to stop, even as he raised his lightsaber and brought it down. Tears streamed from her eyes as she remembered the dream down to the last terrible detail. No, it wasn't a dream. It was a vision of the past. Those younglings, those poor, helpless younglings were all dead. He killed them, Anakin killed them all. He had led the assault on the Jedi Temple, and aided in the killing of every youngling, Padawan, knight and master within its walls. She didn't know that she had been sobbing, and was surprised when Naruto sat beside her, placing an arm on her shoulder to gain her attention. Ayla looked up at her friend, unaware of the tears streaking down her cheeks until Naruto showed her. "These dreams are killing you, Ayla. What did you see?" "Younglings," she replied, angry at herself for her broken voice. "He walked into the chambers and killed them all, to the last boy and girl. Naruto, he murdered children." Naruto's face softened at her distress, and then hardened at her news. Who murdered children? Naruto was an orphan, and because of that there were crimes that he would never allow a person to get away with. He considered anyone who preyed upon defenseless women and children his enemies right down to the bone. It was the reason why he didn't kill Gale straight away. When he saw her defenseless with a pistol pressed against her forehead, he snapped. Naruto crushed Gale's chest armor, made him suffer, and then took off his head. It was a very un-Jedi thing to do, but he wasn't a Jedi. He was a shinobi, and from what he told her, shinobi were bred on the field of battle. They utilized their emotions to survive. Yet unlike the Sith, he didn't let his negative emotions control him. He made her look into his eyes, and she saw his eyes darken ever so slightly. His voice was calm, yet held a storm of negative emotions boiling under the surface. "Ayla, who murdered children?" She took a deep, shaky breath, and looked him in the eyes. "I can't, it couldn't have been him. He was the best of us all." "Ayla, Anakin Skywalker," she replied, slowly regaining control. "The one who murdered them was Anakin Skywalker." Naruto frowned. "You told me stories about him. The hero with no fear who won many battles, who killed the supreme commander of the Separatists, it was him." She nodded, giving into a sudden sob as her memories once again threatened to overwhelm her. He didn't feel right. Anakin was always one of emotion, but he felt like a blank slate. Naruto frowned at her. A clone? Or he cut himself off from his emotions to the point where he became a blank slate to the Force. "I've seen it happen on the battlefield many times before," she replied, now once again in full control of herself. She reached up to wipe the shed tears from her eyes. Ayla didn't lie to herself. She had been an emotional mess ever since Order 66 was given. Seeing visions of your friends and family dying around you was slowly tipping her over the edge. Without Naruto's help and support, she would have lost herself by now. She had only known him for a couple of weeks, but he was now one of her dearest friends. He pressed his forehead against hers, letting her take in his warmth from his touch. It calmed her. "I promise you this, Ayla. I will protect you and everyone I can from this empire." "You have my word, and your way is to keep your word," she replied with a broken laugh. "And for you I will keep my word, to my dying breath," Naruto said with a crooked smile, forehead still touching. Ayla was calm again, eyes closed and a small smile curling her lips upward. "My dear friend and guide." Neither was aware that they were being watched. Donnie Relisa watched the two with widening eyes, before she silently crept away. "I'm telling ya, I know what I saw. Seriously, that hot Twi'lek gal is actually Jedi Knight Ayla Secura," Ken asked with a teasing smile, before turning to Solon and grinning. "Our little babe has lost it, man, been in the cockpit too long." Donnie, for one thing, she is not red. Ayla Secura's skin color is blue, and she didn't have any tattoos last time I seen her either. Solon added for his friend. "Maybe she used a mind trick to make us think she was someone else. I mean, we've heard of the Jedi doing it before." Donnie argued back, not willing to give in. "She does have a point," Link spoke up. "What are we going to do about it? You saw the wanted posters on Felucia. The Empire is offering a 10 million credit bounty on her head, something about helping in polluting Felucia's water supply. Please, I bet you've heard the other stories about her. You know, the ones about saving whole peoples, whole communities, and whole planets. Putting her life on the line to save anyone from her own troopers to innocent people caught in the crossfire. That doesn't sound like someone who would poison a planet's water supply." Solon shot back with a frown. "Those charges stink. What does the captain have to say about it?" Donnie asked, suddenly feeling a little apprehensive. "I say we keep quiet about it. Jaden said as he strolled into the central room of his freighter, dressed in his night clothes. I have also heard about what that woman has done. A true Jedi she is who follows their original mandate to protect and defend. I will not hand someone like that over. You've heard the rumors about what happened at their temple, about troopers killing child and adult alike. The official story was that the knights and masters of the temple did it. Lynx frowned, before hearing a snort from Solon. She did repair our engines for us, both of them. Far added with a smile. And she is arguably one of the hottest women in the galaxy, so I vote for the captain. Donnie frowned, but hung her head. Alright, I'll go with you guys. Shame about the reward though, could have put our money troubles behind us. Lynx muttered, before shaking his head. Alright, I'm with you too. Good lad, Quora replied with a nod, before turning to the door leading to their guest's bedroom. You can come out now. There was a moment of silence before Naruto entered the room, fully dressed, arms folded and a frown on his face as he looked at the 3 men and 1 woman of the last call. So what happens now? Jaden pulled a cigar and match from his waist pocket, popping it into his mouth and lighting it as he spoke. Not a damn thing. See, I was always a Jedi sympathizer, so to speak. In a republic of corruption and injustice they were the only shining light. So the little lady behind you has our protection. Ayla appeared through the hatch behind the blonde, garbed in a simple nightgown, but her lightsaber was still at her side. Thank you, Captain. Nah, don't thank me. Quora replied as he took a deep drag of his cigar, and blew the smoke into the shape of a ring. We'll keep our end of the bargain, as long as you're on my ship you're safe. Anytime you need a ride you just call. Sure I can't offer you 2 places on my crew? Ayla shook her head, tail swirling. We will not place any of you in danger on my account, Captain, nor will we divert you from your business. Suit yourself sweetie, Jaden shrugged, clamping his cigar back between his teeth. But my offer still stands, anytime. Esseles, 3rd planet in the Asesia system. Population just over 24 billion sentient beings. Located in the core worlds region of the galaxy and renowned as one of the most civilized and cultured worlds in the Galactic Republic. It was a rugged world, covered in steep cliffs, mountains and caverns, and also possessed a heavy atmosphere leading to a warm, yet wet climate. Naruto took a deep breath to calm as he looked down. The last call had just re-entered the atmosphere, and the blonde had to physically control himself from panicking when he saw the flames of the upper atmosphere lick against the ship's cockpit windows, trying to find a weakness in the freighter's structure. If the entry into the atmosphere didn't scare him, seeing the ground several thousand kilometers down certainly did. Just a massive expanse of greens and browns which got closer and closer at an alarming rate. The blonde flinched as the last call leveled out, and he heard Jaden laugh boisterously from his pilot's seat. Not much of a flyer or yaw kid? It's his first time, Ayla spoke up in his defense. Sage, help me, Naruto breathed as they slowed, and Ayla was actually worried that he might go into a panic. That was awesome. Can we do it again? Both Jaden and Donnie laughed at that. A daredevil, eh? You bet, Naruto grinned like a madman. Well sorry kid, but if y'all want to do it again it'll cost y'all extra, Quora grinned, before pulling forward on the throttle. We're coming up on the capital, just over this ridge. The freighter went over the top of the mountain, and Naruto stared at a city he would consider a utopia. Calamar was a city dominated by grand architectural buildings of smooth lines and easy colors, stretching from one side of the considerable valley to the other. Its landscape was dominated by not just beautiful buildings but vast gardens and parks. It made Konoha look like a backwater city. Wow, he found himself saying. It's beautiful. Yay, that it is kid. One of the most cultured and beautiful cities in the galaxy Calamar is. Calamar Control, this is the freighter last call, caller identification 397659, requesting permission to dock. Danny's sweet voice spoke, and for a moment Naruto wondered what she was doing. He nearly jumped in surprise when he heard static, and an accented male voice answered her. Last call, this is Calamar Control, permission granted. Set her down at docking bat number 11. Copy that, thanks Control. That's all for now. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments.